Chapter 596. Moreover, Ning Xuema played very quickly. She seemed to be playing casually without thinking. In order not to lose face in front of her, Yunqi played as quickly as she did. As a result, after 10 minutes, Yunqi's palms were sweating as she held the chess pieces. Her black pieces were already showing signs of defeat. After a few more moves, her black pieces were finally unable to turn the tables and were completely defeated. Ning Xuema picked up the teacup next to her and took a sip. She smiled slightly and said, "Thank you for letting me win." Yunqi pursed her lips and clenched her fists in her sleeves. She forced a smile and said, "Miss Ning, you're good at chess. Although Brother Tianlan took most of the credit for this game, it was not easy for you to stay undefeated until the end." Ning Xuema put down the teacup and smiled leisurely. "That's why I said that I had a big advantage in this game." Yunqi packed up the black and white chess pieces. "Shall we play another game?" Ning Xuema's eyes flashed slightly. "Okay, but it's boring to play chess like this. Why don't we make a bet?" "What bet?" Yunqi raised her eyebrows and asked. "It's very simple. Let's play a best-of-5 game. If I win, you can stop coveting Mr. Han Shangyue." Ning Xuema's words were shocking and directly hit Yunqi's weak spot. Yunqi's expression changed and she subconsciously denied it. "What nonsense are you talking about? I'm not." Ning Xuema glanced at her, her eyes faintly sharp. "You don't even have the courage to admit it? How can you catch up with him like this? If you like him, just admit it. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's not wrong to like someone." Yunqi's pretty face turned green and white. She was a little embarrassed that Ning Xuema had exposed her. Ning Xuema's words touched her heart and touched her. Although Ning Xuema's words were bold, they seemed to be very reasonable. She gritted her teeth and said, "What if you lose?" Ning Xuema weighed the chess piece in her hand and answered casually, "It's simple. I'll give him to you and fulfill your wish." Yunqi was stunned for a moment before she burst into laughter. "I don't want to be his concubine." She felt that her words were enough to deal a blow to Ning Xuema. So she leisurely added a few more words, "Miss Ning, it's not that my words are unpleasant, but a concubine is just a little better than a servant girl. Her status is similar to that of a servant girl in a common household. Men wouldn't take her seriously. And I was originally his close friend. We've known each other for many years. I'm not something a concubine that can be discarded at any time can compare to." These words were too harsh. Yunqi thought that Ning Xuema would be embarrassed to death after hearing these words. She hadn't expected that Ning Xuema would just smile and say, "Yes, the status of a concubine is indeed not high. In that case, why is Miss Yunqi so hostile towards me?" Yunqi was stunned and subconsciously denied it. "When have I been hostile towards you?" Ning Xuema smiled calmly and stared at her again. "You don't dare to admit it?" Did she think that her hostility wasn't obvious enough? Yunqi was choked by her words and couldn't say anything. She never knew that Ning Xuema could be so sharp and direct with her words. She almost couldn't hide her little thoughts. She secretly took a breath and steadied her mind. She forced a smile and said, "Well, I do feel a little uncomfortable when I see you, but it's not considered hostility. After all, hostility depends on the opponent. Only a strong opponent can arouse hostility." Chapter 597. Ning Xuema smiled and said, "Do you think I'm not worthy of your hostility?" Yunqi snorted and said, "You're just his concubine." She looked at Ning Xuema's face and said, "Miss Ning, do you think that he treats you well so you're feeling smug? In fact, he treats you like a plaything. He has a very bad habit that you probably don't know about. He's lived for a long time and life is boring, so he often cultivates a few small interests to pass the time. For example, he raised rare animals for a period of time. He raised foxes, leopards, and so on. He even raised Chongqi. He did his best to raise them and treated them very well. He made them think that they belonged to him and that he would spoil them for the rest of their lives." She picked up the teacup beside her and took a sip before looking at Ning Xuema's expression. Ning Xuema's face was full of wrinkles, so she couldn't tell whether she was in a good mood or not. Yunqi smiled faintly before she continued, however. He was no longer interested, so he put these precious beasts aside. He gave them away and set them free. My snow lion originally belonged to him, but he later gave it to me as a mount. Tianlan Swanee was also a gift from him. After these rare animals were sent away, They realized that they were just passersby in his life. After a few years, he didn't even remember their names. Ning Shuima turned the teacup in her hand and seemed to be very interested. When she heard Yunqi pause, she said, "Continue." Yunqi was stunned and looked at Ning Shuima again. Did this little girl really not care? Or was she very calm? She couldn't help but want to poke at Ning Shuima. These rare beasts were once his playthings. Later on, although they were given away, they still know a few things about him. For example, his real name and his likes and dislikes. This shows that he still cares about them a little. Of course, he didn't even bother to tell them his name. Ning Shuima listened without showing any expression, but she smiled bitterly in her heart. Sure enough, she couldn't even compare to those rare animals in his heart. She took a deep breath. Fortunately, it was just a deal between them. She was just his shield concubine, so he didn't have to explain so much to her. And she didn't have to care so much. Although she had already thought this through, she still felt a little uncomfortable in her heart. She was just glad that she hadn't fallen in love with him yet. Fortunately, it was just a deal between them. Since she was a good shield good, then she would be a good shield. Her first priority now was to help him destroy this peach blossom. She tapped her finger on the chessboard. What you said is indeed very reasonable. Since that's the case, isn't it better for you to be his confidant? Why must you have a crush on him and want to marry him? Aren't you afraid that you'll end up like those rare animals? Yunqi was stunned. I want to be his wife. I want to be by his side for the rest of his life. I want to be with him. I have. Generation after generation? Forever? This was nothing more than a person's beautiful wish. How could there be any life after life in this world? Forever is even more nonsense. Ning Shuima chuckled. There's a saying in our world called the 7-year itch. Chapter 598. Ning Shuima chuckled. In my world, we have a saying called the 7-year itch. There's also a saying that marriage is the grave of love. It means that no matter how much love two people have, once they live together for a long time, they will eventually get tired of each other. Humans have such a short lifespan. What's more, immortals like you who have limitless lifespans. You said it yourself, Great God Han has the habit of liking the new and hating the old. Even if you marry him as his wife, he might get tired of you after a few years. Once you separate, it will be a resentful couple. At that time, you won't even be friends anymore. These words were too realistic and sharp. Yunqi, who had lived for thousands of years and was still a little white flower, was stunned. After a while, she angrily said, He won't. He will love me very, very much. We can be considered childhood sweethearts. You can't be envious of our relationship. Ning Shuima smiled and shook her head. I don't envy you. What was there to envy about a girl who had fallen in love with someone else? She only felt that she was pitiful and tragic. Yunqi didn't understand her unspoken words and sneered. You can't be envious even if you want to. You are just a little concubine of his. Naturally, I'm quite curious. Since you have been by his side for thousands of years, why can't you make him fall in love with you? Aren't you afraid of lowering your status and attacking the concubine you despise the most? Could it be that you are envious of the position of concubine? Are you just too embarrassed to say it? Ning Shuima looked at her with a smile. Her words pierced Yunqi's heart. Yunqi had originally wanted to attack Ning Shuima, but she hadn't expected that after saying so much, she hadn't attacked Ning Shuima. Instead, she had attacked Ning Shuang. Her face was snow white, and she clenched her fists. You are talking nonsense. I don't envy you. I just don't like you. You don't deserve to stay by his side, not even as a concubine. She was so embarrassed that she finally said the words that had been buried in her heart. Very good. Ning Shuima pointed at the chessboard. Then let's bet on these few games. I also don't like you, so why don't we be straightforward? If I lose, I quit. I don't want to be a concubine anymore. If you've lost, you should quit. Don't try to appear in front of him again. To be honest, the reason you came up with is pretty lame. It sounds so fake to me. When it came to provoking people, Ning Shuima was definitely an expert. After all, Yunqi had lived a simple life. How could she beat Ning Shuima, who could battle a group of scholars with words? Ning Shuima's words stung her so much that she flew into a rage out of humiliation. Blood rushed to her head and she made up her mind. I'll bet. This consort will make you accept your defeat wholeheartedly. Ning Xuema smiled. All right. How satisfying. This was more like an immortal. Oh right, you won't go back on your word if you lose, right? Yunqi was furious. Of course not. I am a woman of my word. Then you have to make an oath first. Ning Xuema pressed on. Yunqi was stunned. She didn't want to make an oath, but since she was forced to this point, it wouldn't make sense for her to not make an oath. She didn't believe that she would lose to Ning Xuema. She didn't believe that she, a dignified palace master, couldn't lose to an ordinary woman. She finally made an oath. If this consort loses, I will never appear in front of Han Shangyue again. The faint sound of thunder came from afar, proving that the oath had been made. Since she had made an oath, she naturally wanted Ning Xuema to make an oath as well. Ning Xuema was more straightforward when she made an oath. Yunqi also had her own plans in mind. Chapter 599. If Ning Xuema won this time, she would be able to help Han Shangyue get rid of one of his admirers. If she lost, she would be able to officially annul her engagement with Han Shangyue and stop being his concubine. Regardless of whether she won or lost, it would be beneficial to her. Therefore, Ning Xuema felt no pressure playing chess this time. The two of them started the game. Ning Xuema played casually. Yunqi, on the other hand, would think for a long time before she made a move. She had to win. However, she had obviously underestimated Ning Xuema's chess skills. Ning Xuema had once defeated a world champion in the modern era. Furthermore, her chess style was ever-changing, so others simply couldn't grasp her pattern. Of course, Yunqi couldn't grasp it either. In the first game, Ning Xuema took the route of capturing the leader first. Her chess style was grand and sweeping, and Yunqi was defeated. Yunqi was sweating profusely. She gathered her energy and played the second game with Ning Xuema. She had already thought of a way to deal with Ning Xuema's chess style. Step by step, she would defend like Sima E. However, she hadn't expected that Ning Xuema's chess style would change again. She began to nibble away at Yunqi's weakness step by step. She didn't attack head-on. Instead, she focused on attacking Yunqi's weakness and then surrounded her in the middle. After an hour, Yunqi showed signs of defeat again. Her face was pale and beads of sweat rolled down her forehead. She couldn't afford to lose this game. She had to win. She was so focused on the game in front of her that she didn't even notice when Han Shangyue, Rongyue and Tianlan came out. Yunqi was holding a piece in her hand and thinking hard when a voice sounded behind her. Play here. A slender jade-like finger pointed to a position. The voice was as cold as ever, but Yunqi's heart was filled with joy and warmth. Without saying anything, she immediately placed the piece there. Ning Xuema looked up at Han Shangyue, who was standing beside Yunqi, and said with a faint smile, "Great master, don't speak while watching chess. What you are doing is against the rules of chess." Han Shanyue's gaze landed on Ning Xuema. Then he looked at the chessboard in front of him. His eyes were filled with surprise. Clearly, he had not expected Ning Xuema to be so good at Go. This was beyond his expectations. He had always been a chess fanatic, and it was very difficult for him to meet an opponent. Now that he had seen this chess game, his hands were itching. Yunqi's side was clearly losing, so he could easily salvage the situation. He tapped the chessboard with his finger. "Yunqi, get up." Yunqi, who was secretly delighted, stood up gracefully. "All right, please help me win this round, sir." She then gave up her seat. Han Shangyue switched to another chair and sat opposite Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema looked at him. "Guru, are you sure you want to kill this game for her?" Han Shangyue gave a light hum. His fingers had already picked up a chess piece. "The chessboard is like a battlefield. I will not give way to you." Ning Xuema also straightened up, smiled and said straightforwardly, "Okay. Just don't regret it, Guru." Han Shangyue did not continue the conversation. He did not know what regret was in this lifetime. The two of them sat in front of the chessboard and started to fight. When Ning Xuema was playing chess with Yunqi, she was just playing casually because Yunqi's chess skills were still too low for her. She was just playing chess with her to kill time and help Han Shangyue get rid of the peach blossoms. Therefore, Ning Xuema did not give her all. However, now that Han Shangyue had taken over, she immediately felt that her opponent's chess skills were strong. Although winning or losing did not matter to her, Her competitive nature did not allow her to easily lose to him. Chapter 600. Ning Xuema immediately perked up and began to fight seriously with Han Shangyue. The two of them went back and forth, and it was an eye-opener for the two spectators. Yunqi's face turned pale after watching for a while. She had finally witnessed Ning Xuema's chess skills. Ning Xuema's chess skills were much better than she had imagined. If she had continued to play with her, she would have lost all 3 games without a doubt. There was no suspense at all. She hadn't expected this girl to have such an ability. She was clearly just a teenage girl. How could her chess skills be better than hers, who had been immersed in the game for thousands of years? Unfair. It was too unfair. Rongyue Tianlan was also a chess fan. At first he didn't take Ning Xuema seriously, but after watching for a while, he had a whole new level of respect for this little girl. This little girl's chess skills were unprecedentedly high. An expert. Her moves were simply too cool. Every move was within reason, but also beyond his expectations. She gave him a surprise every few moves. When Ning Xuema and Yunqi were playing, it was still an ordinary game. However, after the two of them fought for half an hour, the situation on the chessboard had completely changed. The two of them each made strange moves, and the game was full of ups and downs. It was like two strong opponents on a battlefield filled with smoke. Although flesh and blood were flying everywhere, it still made people's blood boil. Rongyue Tianlan was delighted to see this. He couldn't wait to chase Han Shangyue away so that he could have some fun too. He watched from the side and even forgot to wave his fan. His eyes were fixed on the chessboard as he pondered the game. Playing chess really didn't care about age. Talent was extremely important. This was also why sometimes a teenager could kill everyone, defeat national chess players, and create miracles. The world of chess had no lack of miracles. There were often dark horses that jumped out to amaze people. Ning Xuema was no doubt such a dark horse. She was good at calculation and setting up traps for others. Chess was a perfect match for her. In this game, sometimes the white pieces had the upper hand, and sometimes the black pieces had the upper hand. The ups and downs were dazzling. In the beginning, Han Shangyue did not take Ning Xuema seriously. But after a quarter of an hour, after suffering 2 or 3 hidden losses from her, he finally began to take her seriously. The two of them played this game of chess for nearly 2 hours before the outcome was finally revealed. Han Shangyue won by a narrow margin. Yunqi finally felt at ease. She smiled and said, "Thank you, sir, for helping me win this game of chess." Han Shanyue's chess addiction had been completely aroused by Ning Xuema. He didn't care about what Yunqi had said. He just looked at Ning Xuema. His eyes seemed to sparkle as he tapped the chessboard with his finger. 2 more games. Ning Xuema looked at the chessboard and then at him. "Are you still playing for her?" Han Shanyue did not care about this at all. What was the difference between him playing for Yunqi and playing for himself? Wasn't it all because of him? He had always been a man of few words. So, he only made a sound of agreement and urged her to continue. Ning Xuema's eyes flickered slightly. She raised her hand and touched the slightly prominent cinnabar mole on her forehead. Perhaps she could cancel this heavenly marriage today. She had been tricked into agreeing to this heavenly marriage. Now, she could use the same method to cancel it with him. It could be considered as getting back at him, however. If she canceled this heavenly marriage, she would have no protection. Would Han Shanyue still be willing to protect her? This was really an unknown factor. Ning Xuema was slightly lost in thought. Chapter 601. Han Shanyue glanced at her and pursed his lips. How could this girl be distracted while playing chess with him? He was slightly unhappy, but he did not point it out. The chess pieces in his hand were like a storm, and within a few minutes, Ning Xuema was forced to retreat. By the time Ning Xuema regained her senses, it was already too late. She could only lose miserably. "Ning Xuema, if you get distracted again in the next game, I will let you enter the chess game and let you experience the consequences of a general's mistakes." Han Shanyue was obviously not in a good mood. His voice seemed to carry a layer of frost. Ning Xuema glanced at him and took a deep breath. She suddenly asked, "Great God, if I was not your concubine, would you still care about my life and death when I was in danger?" Han Shanyue's fingers paused, and he looked at her with a cold gaze. "Why do you ask?" The heavenly marriage had already been set, and she still wanted to escape? Ning Xuema smiled. Hypothetically not. The snow-white chess piece spun on Han Shanyue's fingertips, directly blocking Ning Xuema's words. Yunqi smiled at the side. There are millions of people in this world, and how many of them are personally protected by Mr. Miss Ning is so smart, even without Mr.'s protection you would still be able to live a good life, right? Ning Xuema glanced at Yunqi and said indifferently, if Mr. Han did not say that I was a jinx, perhaps I would be able to live a better life. It was all because of this jinx. You were originally a jinx and I was only judging you. If I did not say it, you would have already become Lu Hin Ti's beast concubine. Han Shanyue's gaze was faintly sharp. Or do you actually want to marry that old man? Ning Xuema was stunned. She thought about the situation before she was called a jinx. Various sects were vying for her, Lu Hin Ti's imperial edict to make her a concubine, and Ji Yunhuang's marriage proposal at that time. Her surroundings were indeed turbulent, and there was not a moment of peace. It seemed that after the rumor that she was a heavenly calamity star, the various forces that were hiding in the dark finally calmed down. Her reputation was a little bad, but she didn't suffer any other losses. So you're saying that it's for my own good that you criticized me in front of everyone? So you only understand now. Han Shanyue's voice was still calm. Exposing her identity as a heavenly calamity lone star was indeed the quickest way to get rid of the troubles around her, the most effective way to get rid of those peach blossoms. Although it was a hindrance to her reputation, she had never cared about this. This was also his initial thought. He always chose the most direct and effective way to solve problems. Usually, he would not consider those minor details. Although it was simple and crude, it could solve the problem once and for all. But after I became a loner, I still got into trouble. Ning Xuema was not convinced. Han Shanyue paused for a moment and gave her 2 words. You asked for it? Ning Xuema pursed her lips and carefully thought about what happened after she became a loner. It seemed that it was because of that red-clothed evildoer. If it was not for him finding trouble with her, she could have lived a peaceful life and become stronger step by step at that time. Releasing that evildoer was the biggest mistake in her life. That crystal coffin was scarier than Pandora's box. Once it was opened, there would be endless variables and endless troubles. It would be great if she could reseal that bastard again. At that time, she would definitely cover him with 10 layers of coffins and seal him to death. She would let that bastard sleep in there for thousands of years. Chapter 602. Han Shanyue suddenly stood up and said calmly, let's not play this game anymore. Playing chess required both parties to give it their all. It was only interesting when both parties were focused. If the opponent was distracted, what was the point of the game? Ning Xuema frowned. How could she not play? It was a best-of-5 game. They had only played 3 games. There were still 2 games left. Yunqi's expression changed as well. She said, Miss Ning, don't be distracted. We agreed on a best-of-5 game. How can we fulfill the bet before we finish? When she said this, Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Yunqi, this idiot, if she revealed the bet, it would be bad. Sure enough, when Yunqi said this, Han Shanyue glanced over and looked at the 2 girls. So you guys made a bet. What did you bet on? Ning Xuema spread her hands and smiled. She didn't say anything. Yunqi bit her lip. We just casually made a bet. She was a little flustered. She couldn't tell him about the bet. Rong Yutianlan looked at one and then the other. He couldn't help but shake his head. He was very smart. He connected the dots and guessed what the bet was about. Although Han Shanyue was cold, his deductive ability was not ordinary. He immediately understood after thinking about it. He glanced coldly at Ning Xuema. This bastard had gambled him. She had actually used him as a wager. How dare she? How could she? What did she take him for? No wonder she had asked what would happen if she didn't become his concubine. So this was the reason. He had almost fallen head first into her trap and lost himself in it. His gaze was too sharp. Ning Xuema felt a chill in her heart. She knew that he had guessed it. Damn it, Yunqi, this idiot. A best-of-5 game, right? Since we made the bet, it would be unreasonable if we didn't fulfill it. There are 2 more games. Yunqi, you play. Han Shanyue finally spoke again. His voice was monotonous, as if he hadn't guessed what the bet was. Yunqi's face turned pale. She had seen Ning Xuema's true skill in chess with her own eyes. If she were to play these 2 rounds, she would definitely lose. Sure, it's the same even if Sir replaces Yunqi. She was still hoping for a fluke. It would be truly exciting to watch Sir and Miss Ning play chess directly. Besides, Yunqi has a slight headache right now. I'm afraid she won't be able to perform at her usual level. Han Shanyue faintly said, I have already helped you 2 rounds. If I help you again, it would be unfair. Since it was a bet, he had to see the results today. You can still find other helpers. At this point, he glanced at Rong Yuetian lightly. Rong Yuetian smiled bitterly and touched his nose. He seemed to be that other person. Yunqi had no choice but to turn to Rong Yuetianlan for help. Brother Rongyue, why don't you take my place in these 2 rounds? Rong Yuetian's chess skills were on par with Han Shanyue's. She was just a little bit worse, so she should be able to fight him. She had already won 2 rounds. As long as Rong Yuetianlan won one of the remaining 2 rounds, Yunqi would win. Then, she would be able to eliminate Ning Xuema as a formidable opponent forever. Rong Yuetian really wanted to play 2 rounds with Ning Xuema. However, he was under a lot of pressure to replace Yunqi at this time. Chapter 603. If he won, he would offend Dizwa. If he lost, Yunqi would never have another chance. Yunqi, you idiot. Just now, you were thinking of ways to trick Dizwa into playing on your behalf. But when you mentioned the bet, Dizwa realized it in time and pulled out. Now he had to take the blame. He waved his fan and was a little hesitant. Han Shanyue looked at him and said, Don't tell me you don't even have the courage to play chess with the little girl? How could he not? Rongyi Yuishinlin steeled himself and sat down on Yunqi's seat. He didn't forget to say the ugly words first. There are no fathers, sons, and friends in chess. I will do my best and won't give even half a stone. He would do his best. As for whether he would win or lose, it was up to the heavens. Ning Xuema had already walked to the tea table to drink tea. When she heard that Rongyi Yuishinlin was going to take over, she rubbed her eyebrows. It was just a game of chess. Did she have to face the 3 masters present? Before she could finish her thought, she was pulled over by Han Shanyue and sat down on the table. He looked at Rongyi Yuishinlin and said, She doesn't need you to give in to her. You just have to do your best. He then whispered in Ning Xuema's ear, I know your level. Don't you dare go easy on her. He simply pulled out a stool and sat beside Ning Xuema, eyeing her like a tiger eyeing its prey while watching the game. His body was very close to Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema could even smell the faint fragrance on his body. With him sitting beside her, even if she wanted to go easy on her, she wouldn't be able to. She was also very strong. Since she couldn't go easy, she might as well go all out. Han Shanyue's expression didn't change, but he was secretly paying attention to Ning Xuema's state. When he saw her eyes shining, he knew that she had raised her fighting spirit. He secretly sighed in relief. The little girl wasn't stupid. If she was still distracted like before, he had other ways to make her focus. Ning Xuema and Rongyi Yuishinlin started to fight again in the chess game. Han Shanyue and Yunqi watched from the side with their own thoughts. Rong Yuetian's chess skills were not to be underestimated. His style of chess was similar to Ning Xuema's. His style was changeable, either attacking head-on or playing unconventional. Ning Xuema did not understand his playing style, but he had watched Ning Xuema play 2 games, and had already grasped her general way of playing chess. In this way, in the first half of the game, Ning Xuema was at a disadvantage. She was caught off guard and took a few stones in a row. He was at a slight disadvantage. Yunqi was so nervous that her palms were sweating. When she saw that Rong Yuetianlan had the upper hand, she heaved a sigh of relief. In order to encourage Rong Yuetianlan, she specially brewed a cup of tea for Rong Yuetianlan and attentively placed it beside his hand. Rong Yuetianlan picked it up and took a sip, indicating that she enjoyed it very much. Most of the time, Yunqi was very understanding. Ning Xuema's lips were also a little dry. She glanced at the 2 people opposite her and pursed her lips. However, she didn't expect Han Shanyue to brew tea for her. Such a proud person would only be served by others. She could only finish this game and then go and drink by herself. Her thoughts quickly turned back to the chess game. Rong Yuetianlan's playing style was the same as his personality. He was sloppy and careless. He placed one stone in the east and another in the west. It seemed that there was no pattern, but in fact it was a pattern of his own. Ning Xuema would fall into his trap if she was not careful. It seems that Rongyue Tianlan is also a master of strategy. He is not inferior to Han Shangyue. Ning Xuema remained calm. Chapter 604. Ning Xuema braced herself. Every step of her plan had been carefully thought out before it was executed. Playing chess was like fighting a war. All kinds of military strategies could be used. Delaying the enemy, luring the enemy, besieging Wei to save Zhao while she was racking her brains. A cup of tea suddenly appeared beside her hand. The azure cup was translucent, and a dark green flower was slowly blooming in the dark green tea. Upon closer inspection, the flower wasn't a real flower. It was made up of countless petals and leaves that gathered together to form a beautiful flower. Steam rose in spirals and the fragrance of the tea was light and cold. Ning Xuema was also someone who understood tea. She had seen a lot of things in the way of tea, but this was the first time she saw this kind of tea. Before he even took a sip of the tea, he felt a cool breeze rush to his head just by smelling the fragrance of the tea, and his mind became much clearer. Good tea. Needless to say, this cup of tea was brewed by Han Shangyue. Ning Xuema's heart warmed. She didn't expect this arrogant emperor to brew tea for her. My viburnum spring. Rongyue Shenlin almost jumped up. Yunqi's expression changed slightly. The viburnum spring was Rongyue Shenlin's treasure. This kind of tea was very rare. It took hundreds of years to collect the same amount of tea as Ning Xuema's cup. Rongyue Shenlin had collected a total of 10 stalks. He treated them like his treasure. Even when she came, he was reluctant to share them. She recognized it because when Dizwa came to recuperate, Rongyue Shenlin had taken out one stalk to treat him. It left a deep impression on her. Now Han Shangyue had brewed a cup of tea for Ning Xuema. How could Rongyue Shenlin remain calm? He simply couldn't stay calm. He took a deep breath and stared at Han Shangyue. You took it without asking. It's stealing, Dizwa. No matter how much you please a beauty, you can't be a thief. It's destroying my 3 views. It's simply destroying my 3 views. Han Shangyue looked indifferent. He tapped the chessboard with his finger and said, "Don't be distracted." How could Rongyue Tianlan not be distracted when her precious treasure was stolen? His heart was in a mess. His tea was hidden in an extremely secret place. There were mechanisms everywhere. Even if he went to retrieve it himself, it would take him at least an hour to go back and forth. However, Han Shangyue had never left the hall. How did he get it? Or perhaps Han Shangyue also had a few of these tea leaves and just happened to bring them over. The tea in Ning Xuema's hand was brought by himself, not stolen from him? All kinds of conjectures and thoughts hovered in Rongyue Shen's mind. He couldn't wait to run to the secret room where he kept the tea to check it out. As a result, he was distracted and could no longer concentrate on playing chess. Ning Xuema's chess skills were about the same as his. Now that he was distracted, Ning Xuema took the opportunity to kill all the players. An hour later, Rongyue Tianlan was finally defeated by a difference of 2 pieces. After this round of chess, Rongyue Shenlin immediately got up to check. Han Shangyue put the white jade flute on his shoulder and said, "Finish the last round before you leave." The strength of his flute was neither light nor heavy. It was just enough to make Rongyue Shenlin unable to get up unless he used a spell to flick the jade flute away. However, if he did that, wouldn't it be equivalent to attacking Dizwa? Although Rongyue Shenlin's heart ached for his tea, he wouldn't risk his life for a cup of tea. Besides, even if Dizwa moved his house, he could only watch, let alone take his tea. Chapter 605. He bitterly smiled. He could only sit back down and play the most crucial game of chess with Ning Xuema. Yunqi was so nervous that she was sweating. She looked at Ning Xuema and then at Han Shangyue behind her. Ning Xuema was focused on the game while Han Shanyue's gaze was fixed on the chessboard. He didn't look at her at all. Yunqi's nails dug into her palms and she bit her lips until they turned white. For so many years, she had never been able to get close to him. He had always been indifferent to her, neither close nor far. She thought that he was naturally cold and emotionless. She didn't expect that he would allow a common woman like Ning Xuema to get close to him, and even become his concubine. She couldn't accept it. She really couldn't accept it. Yunqi's heart, which she had cultivated for 1,000 years, was stirred up again. In the last game, Ning Xuema and Rongyue Tianlan fought brilliantly. Both of them gradually grasped each other's style and the game became more intense. Rongyue Tianlan was still thinking about his tea at first and was a little restless. Later on, all his energy was absorbed by the game. The feeling of meeting a worthy opponent was too good. Especially since the other party was an inconspicuous woman. This feeling doubled. At this time he had completely regarded Ning Xuema as a worthy opponent. The way he looked at Ning Xuema was also different. Previously, when he looked at Ning Xuema, he thought that she was Dizwa's concubine and was mostly curious. After all, Ning Xuema was an ordinary person. With his status he didn't pay much attention to her. But now, Rongyue looked at her as if he was looking at a worthy opponent. There was excitement and appreciation in his eyes. In the last game both of them used their unique moves. Neither of them gave way to the other. Both of them were fully immersed in the game. When the last piece was played, Ning Xuema won by a single piece. Rongyue Tianlan pushed the chessboard and stood up. Miss Ning is indeed an expert in this field. Rongyue accepts her loss wholeheartedly. Ning Xuema smiled. Brother Rongyue was a little distracted when he was playing chess. Otherwise it would be hard to tell who would win this game. She was telling the truth. Rongyue Tianlan was indeed a little absent-minded at the beginning, and the start was not very good. I didn't expect her to be able to see through this. Rongyue Tian still felt unsatisfied. Why don't we play a few more rounds? Before Ning Xuema could say anything, Han Shangyue had already opened his mouth. She has already won 3 out of 5 rounds. There is no need to continue. Then he glanced at Yunqi. You can fulfill your respective wager now. Yunqi's face turned pale as she took 2 steps back. I still have matters to attend to in the palace. I'll take my leave now. She turned around and walked out quickly. Rongyue Tian's eyes flashed with guilt. After all, Yunqi was his good friend for 1,000 years. Deep in his heart, he was still biased towards her however. He had already tried his best and could no longer help her. He could only watch as she left. Yunqi's figure disappeared at the entrance of the palace. Rongyue Tianlan looked back at Han Shangyue. You are too heartless. Han Shangyue looked indifferent. If you don't have such intentions, why give her hope? He didn't have any feelings for Yunqi. Why should he give her hope and then give her despair? It was best to cut the Gordian knot. It was best for both of them. Rongyue Tianlan was stunned. He had to admit that what he said was reasonable. He thought of his tea again and couldn't help but glance at Han Shangyue. Chapter 606. He thought of his tea and couldn't help but glance at Han Shangyue. Dizwa, I think your method is a bit too unkind. He said this through sound transmission so that Ning Xuema couldn't hear him. Han Shangyue calmly flicked his sleeves. It involves my marriage. Even if it's unkind, it's pardonable. Rongyu Ishinlin said. Dizwa, I think your skin can be even thicker. Han Shangyue leisurely said, thicker? Very well, I still have 3 viburnum flowers here. I originally wanted to compensate you for the fruit you gave me last time. Now it seems that I don't need to give it to you. The viburnum flowers really belong to Han Shangyue. Rongyu Ishinlin sighed in relief and was immediately attracted by the 3 viburnum flowers. Ah, Dizwa, I was wrong. Dizwa's skin is neither thick nor thin. If it were any thicker, it would be bad. Han Shangyue was speechless. As the 2 of them were talking through sound transmission, Ning Xuema finished her cup of precious tea. She looked at the 2 of them and said, Are you 2 done talking? When will my appearance-changing technique be broken? Rongyu Ishinlin finally remembered this important matter and immediately said, Mr. Han, please explain it to her. I will go and prepare the things we need. She slipped away. Ning Xuema was full of doubts. She looked at Han Shangyue and said, Breaking this is quite troublesome? It's not just a little troublesome. Han Shangyue spat out these words. Let's go out for a walk. I will explain it to you. Carefree Island was worthy of being called a paradise. Every step was like a painting, and there were beautiful scenery everywhere. Ning Xuema and Han Shangyue walked side by side. There were huge trees on both sides of the road. The leaves of the trees were golden yellow, and they looked like canopies. When the wind blew, countless golden leaves fell down and danced behind the two of them. The scenery was very beautiful and picturesque, but Ning Xuema's mood was very nervous. Because Han Shanhua had already walked 2 rounds with her, but he still hadn't said a word about how to remove her disguise. He did ask a lot of small talk, such as who her go-master was and so on. He also asked a lot of other things, but he didn't get to the point. With Han Shanhua's personality, he was not someone who would be so hesitant. The reason why he was hesitant now must be because her disguise was extremely difficult to undo. Perhaps she would never be able to recover. He looked just like a family member of a terminally ill patient. Guru, is there no way to save my looks? Just say it. Can take it. Ning Xuema asked directly, not wanting to beat around the bush. Han Shanhua glanced at her, pondered for a moment and waved at her. Come here. Ning Xuema was bending over to look at a flower. Hearing his words, she couldn't help but look up at him. He stood under the golden tree, his moonlight robe fluttering in the wind. The golden leaves danced around him, but not a single one fell on his body. His ink-black hair was like water, draping over his body. His lips were curved in a smile that wasn't a smile. At this moment, it was as if he had entered into a painting, and the bright colors around him became a backdrop for him. His aura was usually too strong, so it was easy for people to overlook his appearance. But at this moment he seemed to have restrained his pressure. He stood under the tree, the wind lifting his clothes, making it seem as if he were flying. Ning Xuema couldn't help but think of a line in a poem. Young Master Imo is like jade, peerless in the world. Chapter 607. At this moment, Ning Xuema suddenly realized that Mr. Han was also a handsome young man, and he was also a handsome young man. Her cold and otherworldly temperament, her elegant demeanor, and the faint smile on her lips actually gave people a strong visual impact. Especially when he was looking at someone intently, his deep blue eyes seemed to have a great attraction. Under his gaze, Ning Xuema's heartbeat suddenly sped up. What do you want? He was not far from her, only 3 to 4 meters away. It was a safe distance and it was convenient for them to talk. Why did he want her to go over? She stood there without any intention of moving. Are you afraid that I will eat you? Come here. The faint smile on Han Shanhua's lips disappeared, and the oppressive aura was released again. This was more like him. Ning Xuema's strange feeling disappeared, and she walked over. Great God, what's the matter? She hadn't finished speaking when her wrist was suddenly grabbed by him. He took advantage of the situation and pulled. How could Ning Xuema be his opponent? She directly threw herself into his embrace. She pounced too fiercely, and the tip of her nose almost hit his chest. She was also a fast person, and hurriedly used her other hand to cushion his chest in advance, thus avoiding the fate of the tip of her nose being hit. His breath instantly surrounded her, and Ning Xuema's heart that had just calmed down started to jump again. She angrily raised her head. What are you doing? She choked back the words she was about to say, because his handsome face leaned down, and his intoxicating breath instantly approached. He wanted to kiss her. Ning Xuema's heart was like a little rabbit, and it was beating like a drum. You don't. She subconsciously wanted to push him away, but one hand was held by him, and the other hand did not know why she could not use any strength. He was getting closer and closer, closer and closer. Her hands and feet were weak, and her eyes subconsciously closed. His lips suddenly stopped when they were less than an inch away from hers. His magnetic voice rang in her ear. Xuema, are you nervous? His hand was still holding her wrist, and he could clearly feel her pulse. He added, your heart is beating very fast, and you don't reject my approach. Does this prove that you like me? Ning Xuema's mind was a little muddled due to the influence of his breath. When she heard his words, her mind was blown and she subconsciously pushed him. You're thinking too much. Her push actually pushed him half a foot away. Without his aura shrouding her, Ning Xuema could finally breathe to her heart's content. Am I overthinking? Han Shanhua didn't let go of her. He flipped his hand and pushed her 2 steps back. Ning Xuema was pushed against a tree. He held her hand behind her back with one hand and pressed his body against hers. His other hand was pressed against the tree trunk behind her, and Ning Shuama's entire body was completely covered by him. It was only at this moment that Ning Shuama realized how tall his body was. She wasn't short now, but compared to him, she was petite and dainty. He pressed his body against hers, and his handsome face was less than an inch away from hers. They could hear each other's breathing. This position was really terrible. Ning Shuama had never been pressed down in this position in her life. Moreover, his eyes were like two deep pools that were staring at her body, as if they were going to penetrate her whole body. She felt tormented just by looking at him. Chapter 608. Ning Shuama could see her own reflection in Mr. Han's deep blue eyes. This made her even more flustered. Her heart failed to live up to her expectations and beat even faster. Her face also became hot. No matter how strong she was, no matter how good she was at pretending, she was still a 21 or 22-year-old girl. She seemed to be open and unrestrained, but deep down she was still conservative. Being suppressed like this, she finally panicked. Let go of me first. I'm fine, what's wrong with you? Han Shanyue's eyes were still staring at her, as if he wanted to tear apart her disguise and see her true emotions. And Ning Shuama's reaction made him somewhat satisfied. He stretched out two fingers and lightly pinched her face. It's so hot. You should be blushing, right? Blushing, heartbeat, averting your eyes. Shuama, you still like me? Ning Shuama. Her body slightly stiffened. As if there was an electric current on his fingers, it made her heart tremble. However, this position, especially his words, made her feel embarrassed. She tilted her face and avoided his hand. She sneered, I didn't. You really think too much. Stubborn little girl. Han Shanyue's lips curved into a faint smile. You can't hide from me. He actually smiled. The cold and aloof great god actually smiled. His smile was like the spring flowers blooming, and also like thousands of peach blossoms blooming on the branches. Ning Shuama's eyes were almost dazed. She was momentarily lost in thought. She took a deep breath and quickly calmed down some of her chaotic emotions. She raised her head. Great God, you really think too much. Whether it's blushing or heartbeat, which girl would feel this way when being suppressed? In other words, if you were suppressed by other men, your face would also blush, your heart would race and avert your eyes? The smile on Han Shanyue's face disappeared. Ning Shuama was stunned. Shui Yilan's image flashed through her mind. That bastard also took advantage of her a lot. He also used similar methods to suppress her. At that time she didn't feel blushing, heartbeat, or averted her eyes. It was a deep sense of humiliation, and the biggest thought in her mind was to kill that bastard. Then what she was feeling now was, did she really like him? No, that wasn't it. I don't like him, I just don't hate him. This reaction was probably a normal reaction to being suppressed by a man she didn't dislike. In front of Han Shanyue, she did not want to lose to him in terms of grandeur. Therefore, even though she was confused for a moment, her lips curled into a nonchalant smile. Of course, any man would be the same. Before she could finish her sentence, she was interrupted by Han Shanyue. I don't believe you. I want to try again. Give it a try? How else should he try? Before Ning Shuama could react, he suddenly pressed his lips against hers. Then he pressed his lips against hers. Ning Shuama's mind exploded. Her nostrils were filled with the pleasant smell of his body. His lips were soft, and after their lips met, they were unwilling to leave. Was she forcefully kissed? She was forcefully kissed. Ning Shuama subconsciously wanted to push him away. However, her current strength was like a drizzle to him. She was not a threat at all. She couldn't stop him and could only allow his lips to caress her lips as he wished. His lips were warm and soft. In an instant, she felt as if a strong current had passed through her body. Her head was dizzy, her heart was beating like a drum, and her limbs were weak. Chapter 609. However, his lips were still pressed against Shuama's lips, but he didn't make any further moves. Ning Shuama's lips were a little dry, so she couldn't help but stick out her tongue to lick her lips. Naturally, this lick also licked his lips, his body slightly stiffened, and then he caught the tip of her tongue as if he was enlightened. He gently sucked and slowly bit her tongue and didn't let go. This kind of kiss was undoubtedly torture for Ning Shuama. The tip of her tongue was sucked and numbed by him. She hurriedly retracted her tongue, but it also brought his tongue into her mouth. Ning Shuama's mind was blown again, and her heart was so nervous that it almost jumped out of her chest. She wanted to push his tongue away, but she was entangled with him again. What was originally a simple kiss on the lips developed into a French kiss. Ning Shuama's limbs were weak, and her vision was blurry. In a trance, a few scattered images flashed through her mind, but those images were too fast and too scattered, so she couldn't capture them at all. Her mind seemed to have traversed thousands of mountains and rivers, and then there was a faint and clear laughter. So you don't even know how to kiss? Let me teach you. This voice was so sudden that it made her heart feel like it was hit hard by something. Her nose was inexplicably sour, and her mind was even more confused. She didn't know when her hand was released by him. She didn't know when her arm was hooked around his neck, and her body was completely in his embrace, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. The storm-like kiss finally stopped. His lips slightly left hers, and he whispered in her ear, "You like me." This time he was very sure. Ning Shuama stared blankly for a moment. Her muddled mind finally cleared up. Anger suddenly rose in her heart. She opened her mouth to retort, but his fingertips had already brushed against her lips. "Since you already like me, then I have nothing to worry about." Ah? Ning Shuama originally wanted to tell him that he was thinking too much, and that she didn't like him, but his last sentence attracted her attention. What did you say? What are you worried about?" Before she could finish her sentence, she felt a little dizzy and her vision turned black. Her body went limp and he pulled her back into his arms. Before she fainted, she vaguely heard him say to her, "Shuama, I will restore your appearance." Rongtanlan finally finished preparing everything. He was about to send a boy to invite the two people who were strolling outside. Han Shangyue walked in with Ning Shuama in his arms. Rong Yuetian looked at Ning Shuama in his arms and then looked at her. "You talked to her? Did you tell her everything?" Han Shanyue's face was expressionless as he said, "I don't like to talk. It's better to do it directly." Rong Yuishanlin, Dee's way of doing things was simple and crude. "This is related to this lady's reputation. I feel that she has the right to know and the right to choose." Rong Yuetian felt that it was not appropriate. "She's my concubine, so it's natural for her to do these things. She will accept it." Han Shangyue looked at the layout of the secret chamber, and then looked at Rongyi Yuishanlin. "I feel that you can get lost." Rongyi Yuishanlin thought about it and agreed. These two people were originally husband and wife. Although she was his concubine, Deezwa was indeed her husband. It was natural for him to do these things for her, and there was nothing wrong with it. Under Han Shanyue's obvious gaze, Rongyi Yuishanlin braced herself and told him some things to take note of. Chapter 610. After Rong Yutianlan finished speaking and confirmed that there were no mistakes, she left swiftly. She then closed the door for them. Before Ning Shuamo recovered, no one was allowed to disturb the people inside. Her body felt warm, as if there were clouds floating around her. A warm current flowed into her from the tip of her toes and climbed up her legs inch by inch. Wherever it passed, there was a numbness and itchiness, as if her muscles were slowly regenerating and her blood vessels were becoming lively again. This kind of crawling speed felt very slow. It felt painful and comfortable at the same time. The numbness and itchiness became more and more intense, and more parts of her body. Ning Shuama, who was in a coma, finally regained her consciousness and slowly woke up. Her eyelashes fluttered a few times, and she slowly opened her eyes. After all, she had just woken up from a coma, so her gaze was still a little confused. Then she slowly woke up. What she saw was a wooden wall and a rippling green pool. A luminous pearl above her head emitted a gentle light, illuminating the surroundings. Where was this? Her mind was still a little confused, and her body moved subconsciously. Suddenly her waist was tightened. "Don't move." The voice was cold and a little hoarse. Ning Shuama's body stiffened instantly. She slowly lowered her head, and her eyes widened immediately. She was sitting in a strange position in an oversized wooden tub. There was not a single piece of cloth on her body, and she was as smooth as a newborn baby. The jade green water rippled around her body, and the jade green water gently swayed around her body, creating ripples. The water was so transparent that she could see every inch of her skin clearly. She could even see the light green blood vessels under her skin. She was bathing. But this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that she found an arm wrapped around her waist, and a jade-like palm on her calf. She was sitting in someone's arms. And she was sitting naked in someone's arms. Ah! This scene was too exciting. It was too erotic. Ning Xuema gasped and couldn't help but want to jump up. Don't be afraid. The arm wrapped around her waist tightened again, and a faint light appeared from the arm. Ning Xuema's strength seemed to have been sucked out in an instant, and she couldn't move anymore. This is the only way to restore your appearance. Don't be afraid, just feel me. The cold voice softly sounded behind her. The hand on her calf moved up a few inches, and the light green light slowly rotated from the palm, causing the surrounding green water to swirl as well. This swirling water swirled around her calf, as if it was massaging her calf, and waves of heat rose from her calf, inch by inch. Han. Great God, Han. Ning Xuema's voice slightly trembled. Yes, it's me. The voice behind him was neither fast nor slow, calm and collected. Oh my God. She was actually bathing in the same tub as this almighty God. Ning Xuema felt as if she was struck by lightning, and her body stiffened. Fortunately, she couldn't move right now, or else she would be so nervous that she wouldn't know where to put her hands and feet. She looked down at the arm wrapped around her waist, and the light white sleeves swayed in the water very good. It could be seen that he was wearing clothes. It wasn't a pure couple's bath. He was indeed wearing a robe, but she was fucking naked. She was at a disadvantage, wasn't she? He had seen her naked, touched her all over, and devoured every bit of her tofu. And he... Chapter 6:11. Ning Xuema tried her best to widen her eyes, but could only see one of his hands and a small part of his wrist. Also, this posture is too erotic. She felt that even those erotic films would not necessarily have such a nosebleed scene. What kind of method is this to restore one's original appearance? What kind of lousy setting is this? Needless to say, this method to remove the disguise technique was thought of by that guy Rongjuishan. That guy looks so romantic, so serious. Could it be that he wrote something about jade praying mats or jade girls? Rongjuishan, who was leisurely drinking tea under a big tree in the courtyard, suddenly sneezed. He rubbed his nose, opened the fan with the word romantic written on it and waved it. Who scolded him behind his back. Fortunately, it was just a sneeze. For him it was nothing, so he did not take it to heart. He picked up the cup and took a sip of tea, the corners of his pale red lips slightly hooked up. These were now very erotic, right? Very exciting, right? Would his frozen heart, which had remained motionless for tens of thousands of years, crack open a tiny crack? Infuse a little bit of the mortal world into it. I didn't think that Dizwa would be involved in such matters of love and affection. Love is poison, once touched, it will hurt, but it can make the person involved willingly drink this honey-flavored arsenic. Someone's shadow seemed to flash in front of his eyes. His mind moved, his breathing stopped, and the familiar pain emerged again. His fingers holding the teacup stiffened, lost in thought for a moment, then smiled gently, took a sip of tea, and pressed that shadow into the depths of his memory. In the secret chamber. In the bathtub. Ning Xuema could not help but begin to suppress her breathing. She was still sitting cross-legged in his arms with her legs slightly curled up. Her palms were forced to close over her heart, a standard meditation posture. His palms moved up her calves inch by inch, and had already moved to her knees. The strange numbness became more and more intense, hot and numb in her bone marrow, as if there was an electric current running up and down her limbs and bones. This feeling was both comfortable and painful. Ning Xuema had never tasted such a feeling in her life. She bit her lips hard to prevent herself from moaning. It was as if he had been drugged by some legendary drug, but he couldn't get rid of it. There was an indescribable discomfort, and also an indescribable ecstasy. This feeling was too unbearable and made her feel embarrassed. Subconsciously, she wanted to divert her attention. The only thing that made her feel gratified was that wherever his palm pressed, the flabby skin became plump again, and the skin became white and elastic again, returning to the moist skin of a young girl. At this moment, the parts below her knees and above her feet had returned to their original state, but the parts above her knees had yet to recover. Comparing the two parts, she looked a little strange. Naturally, Ning Xuema also saw her reflection in the water. His face, neck, upper body. They were still so old that she didn't want to take a second look at them. Looking at her wrinkled face, Ning Shuama finally realized a problem. When Han Shangyue kissed her, she was looking at this old face. How could he do it? God, what kind of taste do you have? With his misophobia, when he kissed her, he must have made a huge decision, right? Just to test whether she liked him or not, he really put in a lot of effort. Chapter 6:12. She wondered how many times Master Han had to wipe his mouth after that. So this was the way to break the disguise, to see and touch her naked. Then he asked her if she liked him. Was it because he wanted to take responsibility for her? In that split second, Ning Shuama's mind was already in turmoil. She didn't know how many thoughts flashed through her mind. She felt an inexplicable bitterness in her heart. Because her consciousness had been diverted, she finally ignored some of the itchy numbness in her bones. Her heavy breathing gradually returned to normal. Distracted. Suddenly, she heard his low but clear voice from behind her. His palm moved up another inch. Ning Shuama's body tensed up. His hand was now close to her inner thigh. The skin in this area was already sensitive. Under the heat of his palm, Ning Shuama's body tensed up, and a trembling sound came from her throat. Of course, this trembling sound only came out halfway, and she forcefully swallowed it down. They were not having sex. It was too embarrassing for her to make such a sound. Be natural, don't suppress it. Han Shanyue's voice came from behind her again. That warm breath just beside her ear. Ning Shuama. Damn it, this was a serious time to detoxify the poison. Why did his words sound like what the groom would say during the wedding night? He could be natural, but she could not. That numbing and itchy feeling was overwhelming. Ning Shuama bit her lips hard to suppress the moan that was about to come out. Be born naturally, be destroyed naturally, act according to your nature. Forcefully suppressing it will not be good for your recovery. Han Shanyue's voice came again, but it still sounded monotonous. Ning Shuama inwardly clenched her teeth. This bastard really can't sit still. This method made her want to die, but he was so calm, and she could not hear anything out of the ordinary. Such an erotic position, such an erotic her, sitting in his arms without any barrier. He really did not have any feelings? Damn it, he was even worse than Lu Xiaohui. He really did not have any ambiguous feelings towards her, right? Otherwise, he would not be able to do this. Unless he was a natural eunuch, her thoughts drifted further and further away, and the uncomfortable feeling in her heart grew heavier. I've been staring at your hair the whole time. Han Shanyue, who was behind him, seemed to be able to read his mind. He explained calmly. The method to break this kind of disguise technique was extremely perverse. As a spellcaster, he was not allowed to be emotional. His breath had to be stable, and his output of telekinesis could not be wrong. This required the caster to have a strong mental fortitude and a high enough telekinesis. It can be used freely. On the other hand, the recipient was required to act naturally and not forcefully suppress it. Only by acting naturally could the skin truly recover. Now, Ning Shuama was probably afraid of embarrassing herself, so she was trying her best to hold it in. It was obviously detrimental to her recovery. Therefore, when Han Shanyue noticed that something was wrong with her, he immediately warned her and did not explain himself. Ning Shuama glanced sideways at her own white hair. Alright, facing this kind of brain, even the most amorous rapist probably wouldn't be interested. Ning Shuama looked like an open person, but she was still naturally not open to this kind of thing. And because she was a secret agent, she had to endure hunger and thirst, endure all kinds of temptations, and naturally she had to endure desire. Her tolerance was originally much higher than ordinary people, so her tolerance at this time was also subconscious. Chapter 6:13. In his life, Han Shanyue had met many bold women who flirted in front of him. There were even some who stripped naked in front of him. Moreover, all of these women were devastatingly beautiful. Among them, there was no lack of beauties who were even more beautiful and enchanting than Ning Shuama. However, he was able to turn a blind eye to them, and his heart remained calm. Those women's flirting only made him feel disgusted. Under normal circumstances, those women did not have a good ending. Currently, Ning Shuama's body was still in the state of being half angel and half demon. She really couldn't be considered beautiful. Even her voice sounded a bit old. Logically speaking, her current state shouldn't be able to evoke his state of mind, Let alone having that kind of special thoughts, however, reality and dreams were always poles apart. His emotions wavered. The skin under his palm was like jade. That touch seemed to directly moisten the depths of his soul. A warm current rushed to a certain point in his lower abdomen, causing his palm to heat up instantly. Oh! Ning Xuema, who was under his palm, softly moaned again. She murmured 2 words, Jolie. Han Shangyue instantly felt as if he was struck by lightning. His palm trembled and an inexplicable force almost gushed out from his palm. If this palm strike landed directly on her body, she would definitely be severely injured. Fortunately, Han Shangyue woke up in time and used all his strength to retract his palm. At least it did not hit Ning Xuema. However, the consequence of forcefully retracting the force was that it hit his own body. This caused the blood in his chest to surge and he almost spat out blood again. Because of the instability of the force in his palm, Ning Xuema's recovery speed slowed down. It even showed signs of stopping. Damn it! Rongyue Tianlan once said that once this method of removing the disguise started, it had to be persevered until the end. Otherwise, all the previous efforts would be wasted and she would never be able to recover. This girl was so vain. If he let her be half angel and half demon, she would probably be in so much pain that she would want to die. He did not know what kind of trouble she would cause. He took a deep breath and gathered his thoughts. In order to prevent himself from being disturbed by Ning Xuema's voice, he simply sealed his hearing. If possible, he also wanted to seal the feeling in his palm. However, once he sealed his senses, he would not be able to feel the recovery speed of the skin under his palm. Time trickled by. With the support of Han Shangyue's telekinesis, the potion in the tub was maintained at a constant temperature. From time to time, waves of moving light breathing and moaning could be heard coming from the room. Fortunately, there was a barrier set up outside the house. No matter how big the commotion inside the house was, it wouldn't spread outside. Inside the bathtub, the old woman seemed to have been touched by a magical golden finger. Her skin became tender and youthful inch by inch. His white hair disappeared and was replaced by a head of long black hair. The wrinkles on her face slowly extended and smoothed out. Her long eyelashes, perfectly shaped eyes, high nose bridge and full lips appeared once again. Ning Xuema had never thought that she would have wet dreams. And it was a wet dream that felt incomparably real. In her dream, she was having sex with a man in a red silk tent. That man caressed every inch of her body, but he didn't kiss her. She vaguely felt that this was a dream, but she couldn't wake up no matter what. She didn't know how much time had passed, but she suddenly felt cold, as if someone had poured cold water on her head in the fog. Her body trembled, and the charming spring scenery in front of her suddenly melted away like spring snow. Chapter 6:14. Ning Xuema opened her eyes abruptly as if she had just woken up from a dream. What she saw was an ink-colored gauze curtain. Not a red gauze curtain. Ning Xuema breathed a sigh of relief. It was indeed a dream. It was a wet dream that made her blood boil. Recalling the scene in her dream, she blushed. What was wrong with her? Why would she have such a wet dream? Was she really having a wet dream? It couldn't be. She closed her eyes and recalled the 2 figures in her dream. They were just 2 blurry blobs. Not to mention their faces, she couldn't even remember their figures. It was indeed a dream. It was her fault for not being able to remember the scene in her dream. She didn't know how many dreams she had over the years, but she couldn't remember a single one. When she woke up, all the dreams had dissipated like mist, leaving not the slightest impression in her mind. It was the same this time. The only difference was that she knew she had a wet dream this time. That feeling was so real. She even felt the legendary soreness after sex. But a dream was a dream. When she woke up, she didn't feel any pain in that area. She was in so much pain in her dream. As she regained consciousness, all of her memories came back to her one after another. She finally remembered everything that happened in that weird bathtub. And the memory was broken when Han Shangyue told her that it was supposed to be their wedding night. God. Was she indecent at that time? She subconsciously raised her hand, and what she saw was a small hand that was as fair as spring onions. Her heart skipped a beat. She had recovered. She rolled up her sleeves to take a look. Her arms were as clear as jade. She was worried and rolled them up again. The wide and soft sleeves were rolled up to her shoulders. Her shoulders were soft and white. She had really recovered. The joy in her heart surged. To be on the safe side, she touched her chest and waist again. Her breasts were full and sharp, a perfect semicircle. Her waist was tight, and her skin was as smooth as cream. She had really recovered. She had really recovered. Ning Xuema's heart was bursting with joy. She urgently needed to look at herself in the mirror. She used her arms to support herself and tried to sit up. When she moved her arm, she actually pressed against something soft and hard. She subconsciously turned her head to look. Suddenly, he shuddered and laid back down on the pillow with a plop. Han Shangyue was lying beside her. At this moment, he had one arm supporting his head as he laid there, lazily looking at her. When did he lie beside her without making a sound? No, perhaps he had been there for a long time, but his breathing was too weak. After she woke up, she focused all her energy on recovering her body, so she did not notice him not far away from her. Ning Xuema had never expected that he would be sleeping next to her when she woke up. She was so shocked that she blurted out, "Why are you here?" Han Shanyue's long hair was loose, and his tightly buttoned shirt was a little loose, revealing a small section of his delicate collarbone. His long eyelashes were slightly lowered, and his thin lips were slightly pursed. He looked a little less cold, a little more aloof, and a little more lazy and casual. This made Ning Xuema's heart skip a beat. She looked away from his collarbone. She finally realized what she had pressed down on. It was his hand that was lying flat beside his body. "I am your husband. Last night was our wedding night. Why do you think I am here?" Han Shanyue asked lazily. Chapter 6:15. Bridal Chamber. These words shocked her again. Ning Xuema opened her eyes wide in shock. Was that not a dream? Was it real? She had consummated with him. She almost subconsciously wanted to touch her lower body. Fortunately, she immediately realized that this action was too bold and quickly stopped her hand. She felt her body slightly. It was said that after consummating on the wedding night, that place would be burning and the waist would be extremely sore. However, she did not feel anything there. She should not have been violated. Her waist was indeed a little sore, but it should not be that kind of soreness, right? Ning Xuema was not sure about her own assessment. She calmed herself down and blurted out, "We did not consummate, right?" She only realized that her words were a little silly after she asked. Han Shanyue's eyes deepened. "You are saying that you want to consummate with me?" Ning Xuema, who had just woken up, had a bright red face, as if she had applied a light layer of rouge. Her pair of eyes were bright and lively, and her red lips were plump and moist. At this moment she probably hadn't completely reacted yet. Her pair of eyes were wide open, and her small mouth was slightly open. She looked extremely cute. Because of her touching just now, her nightgown was very messy, revealing 2 white arms, a white jade-like neck, and half of her breasts. She was as innocent as a young girl, but as charming as a fairy. Han Shanyue's heart skipped a beat, and his lower abdomen suddenly tightened. He suddenly had the urge to do something. Ning Xuema was choked by his question and subconsciously retorted, "Who wants to consummate with you?" After saying this, she turned over and wanted to get up. Lying on the same bed as him made her feel a little pressured. Her body had just moved when he caught her. Han Shanyue looked down at her and smiled faintly. "You really don't want to? You know, we are already husband and wife. If you have such needs, I will satisfy you." "Satisfy your head." He said it as if she was a pervert, as if he was forcing himself. His breath was too close, so close that it made her very uncomfortable. She coughed and said seriously, "Almighty, you're thinking too much. I'm just your shield concubine. I'm only there to shield you from peach blossoms. That doesn't include warming your bed." "A shield?" She was still saying that even today. Han Shanyue's breath turned cold. "After everything that happened yesterday, do you still think that you are a concubine who is used as a shield?" "What happened yesterday?" "Oh, that's right. When he removed the disguise for her yesterday, he had seen and touched her all over. But, did he think that she would insist that he take responsibility for this? That was underestimating her too much. She wasn't that unstylish. She was not a woman from this era. Not to mention being seen and touched by him. Even if she really lost that layer of membrane, if it wasn't for love, She wouldn't casually entrust her life to someone else. She coughed once, her small face calm. Almighty, don't take what happened yesterday to heart. You were only treating me because you were in a hurry. I just treated it as a visit to a gynecologist and met a male doctor. I won't let you take responsibility. She felt that her words were profound enough, and he would feel relieved and comfortable after hearing it. But she didn't expect his breath to turn cold. The faint smile on his lips completely disappeared. Don't take it to heart? A male doctor. Chapter 6:16. His voice was like an icy spring, coldly flowing in the air. You're still so light. He didn't say the last word, as if saying it would dirty his mouth. After a pause, he coldly added, since that's the case, as you wish. With a gentle breeze, he was already gone. Ning Xuema was the only one left lying on the bed in the huge bedroom. Damn, he ran away just like that. Did he just say that she was frivolous? Frivolous your head. I was carried around and touched by you bastards like a rag. Did I do it willingly? I didn't care about these bastards, but I became the frivolous one. What kind of bastard logic is this? Ning Xuema's anger rose, and the good mood she had because she had regained her original appearance disappeared. She simply lifted the blanket and jumped off the bed, barefooted, and ran to the dressing mirror to look at her appearance. The mirror here wasn't the ordinary bronze mirror outside, but the mercury glass mirror used by modern people, which reflected people very clearly. What was shown in the mirror was a delicate face like a flower, with brows like the distant mountains, eyes like the ripples of autumn water, and lips like cherry blossoms. Her skin was like snow, and her eyes were as beautiful as a painting. She looked exactly the same as she did in her previous life. She let out a sigh of relief, feeling that the anger in her heart seemed to dissipate a little. She smiled at the mirror, and the girl in the mirror smiled back at her. Her bright eyes narrowed like crescent moons, and her light red lips curled upwards. She clearly had the appearance of a young girl, but her smile was bright and innocent, like a lily that people wanted to hold in the palm of their hands and protect. She didn't know how to do the complicated hairstyles of this era, so she just let her long hair down and trimmed it herself. After a while, she had a hairstyle that she was satisfied with. She looked at herself in the mirror, and it was the look she liked. She then looked at the rather loose nightgown on her body. It was made of snow-white material, and the simple and neat style was clearly someone's style. But it wasn't the style she liked. She looked around and finally found a few sets of women's clothes in a bedside cabinet. There were light yellow, light pink, snow white, and all kinds of styles. She picked out a set and compared it in front of the mirror, and felt that it was passable. Just as she was about to put it on, she lowered her head and felt like she was hit by a stick. The clothes in her hands fell to the ground. Her feet, which were originally like white jade crystals and could make men go crazy, were now in the shape of an old person's feet. Her skin was saggy, and there were light brown age spots on her feet. Her toes were like garlic cloves, pale and weak. How could this be? Ning Xuema's hands were also trembling. She couldn't help but lean over and roll up the loose trousers. The skin above the ankles belonged to a young man. Only her feet. This was the pair of feet that she had once been so proud of. Now they were completely. Why was it that all the other parts of her body had recovered except for her legs? Did he did it? Or was there a unique treatment method for his feet? These two questions were rolling in her heart, and her hands and feet were cold. She took a deep breath and then another. She calmed herself down. No, she had to ask him. She didn't want such feet. Her feet made her look like a monster. She couldn't accept it. Chapter 6:17. Ning Xuema hurriedly put on her clothes and shoes, opened the door and came out. Only then did she realize that this was a separate courtyard. The snow-white courtyard walls were winding, and there were a few banana trees planted under the walls. In the courtyard there was a piece of ink-black jade. One side was rough stone, and the other side was sparkling black jade. Under the sunlight, it shone with a crystal-clear luster. Ning Xuema couldn't help but touch the black stone, and her heart skipped a beat. This was Hetian jade. And such a big piece. A piece of this quality jade the size of a fist was worth a lot, not to mention such a big one. Even if such a piece of jade was found, it would be treasured by collectors. But now it was casually placed here as a fake mountain. It seemed that Rongyue Tianlan was really rich and overbearing. She was really a deity in the world. She casually threw out a piece and it was enough to make people fight over it. The courtyard's decoration was quaint and had a sense of the mountains and the countryside. This style didn't seem like Rongyue Tianlan's but more like Han Shanyue's. But at this time Ning Xuema didn't have time to think about this. She had to quickly find Han Shanyue and ask him what was going on. She went out of the courtyard and looked around. Her small courtyard was located at the top of a mountain, and there was a winding path downwards. Under the cover of the green trees, there were pavilions and terraces looming. Seeing the golden trees planted on both sides of the mountain road, Ning Xuema knew that she was still on Rongyue Tianlan's carefree island. Where would Han Shanyue go in a rage? He should have gone to find Rongyue Tianlan to play chess, right? Ning Xuema ran all the way down. Although her feet were still the feet of an old person, it didn't hinder her running, and she was still very fast. In the process of running, Ning Xuema also felt that her mind power had recovered, and her body was as light as flying. She first used telepathy to contact Kiran. Kiran told her that it was bathing in a very big lake. It said that it had wanted to watch Han Shanyue heal her last night, but it was blocked by his barrier. No matter what, it could not enter. Helpless, it could only wander around. Ning Xuema interrupted its nagging. Where is God Han? Did you see that? No, didn't he have a wedding night with you? Shouldn't he be with you? Kiran was even more confused than her. Ning Xuema was speechless. It seemed like her and Han Shanyue's wedding night was confirmed. He was obviously trying to remove the disguise for her, so how did it become the wedding night? She was too lazy to explain to Kiran and interrupted it. Then have you seen Island Master Rongyu? Yes, I saw him drinking tea under the red heart tree early in the morning. Bright red leaves that looked like hearts danced in the air. Under the big tree, Rongyue Tianlan was sitting under the tree, drinking tea in a light green robe. There was a book on his lap and he looked very relaxed. Seeing Ning Xuema rushing in, he was slightly stunned. Miss Ning? Ning Xuema nodded and smiled brightly. It's me. Good morning, brother Rongyue. Rongyue Tianlan's eyes flashed with surprise. When he first met Ning Xuema, she was still an old lady with wrinkled skin and white hair. He also knew that her original body must be beautiful. He didn't expect that she would be so beautiful. In other words, it was difficult to describe her simply as beautiful. She was wearing a light pink dress, and her black hair covered her forehead. Her black hair was like satin hanging around her body. Chapter 618. Ning Xuema had big eyes and long eyelashes. Her smile was like a crescent moon, bright and resplendent. Her red lips were plump like cherry blossoms. When the corners of her lips curled up, it was exceptionally sweet, like a child who didn't know the ways of the world. She was like a doll that made people let down their guard for no reason and only wanted to kiss her heart and lungs. Rongyue Tianlan boasted that he was a romantic and had seen all kinds of beauties. Naturally, his eyes were very sharp and very picky. His standards were also ridiculously high. Ordinary beauties couldn't enter his eyes. However, this girl made his eyes light up. Among the thousands of beauties he had seen, she might not be the most beautiful, but she had the most temperament and the one that people couldn't take their eyes off. Yunqi was also a pure and peerless beauty. Her facial features were even slightly more exquisite than the girl in front of him, but she was far from being as dazzling as the girl in front of him. Yunqi was like a clear stream, and the girl in front of him was like a fire lotus in full bloom in the ice and snow. Dazzling and beautiful, clear and alluring. Yes, clear and alluring. The two were originally contradictory, but strangely combined in one person, causing people to be inexplicably moved. Even Rongyue Tianlan, who was used to seeing beauties, faintly felt his heart palpitate. Miss Ning is so beautiful. No wonder. Rongyue Tianlan paused and added in his heart, no wonder Dizwa, that 1,000-year-old iceberg, kept making exceptions for you. This sentence was unavoidably rude to the beauty, so Rongyue Tianlan changed his words halfway. Miss Ning, you've recovered well. Ning Xuema smiled faintly. Not bad. She looked around and didn't see Han Shanyue's shadow. Mr. Rongyue, have you seen great god Han? Rongyue Tianlan coughed. He left the island for some matters. Left? Did he just leave her here without saying a word? What did he mean? He didn't want her as a shield? Or did he leave her here temporarily because he had other matters to attend to? Then what about her leg? When will he be back? Rongyue Tianlan shook his head. This he didn't say. Dizwa's behavior had always been unpredictable, and it was even more so this morning. Rongyue Tian had just finished a round of martial arts when she turned around and saw Dizwa standing behind her. Although Dizwa had always been elusive, his sudden appearance startled Rongyue Tianlan. Dizwa was actually wearing a loose sleeping robe. It was true that this did not affect Dizwa's beauty, but this was the first time Yu Tianlan had seen him so slovenly. After this night, he thought that he would be able to see a radiant Dizwa in high spirits. However, he didn't expect that Dizwa would still be able to cover the sky like a blanket. When Han Shangyue saw him, he only said one sentence to him, "I have something to do and have to go out. Take care of her." After that, the old man fluttered his sleeves and left. He was left with a belly full of questions and no one to ask. Now that he had seen Ning Xuema, he wanted to find a breakthrough through her. He quietly looked her up and down. After that night she was still a virgin. Could it be that Dizwa's expression was because he was dissatisfied? Rongyue Tian guessed in her heart. "Miss Ning, did you two quarrel?" Rongyue Shenlin asked tentatively. He actually felt that it was unlikely. With Dizwa's temperament, it was unlikely that he would quarrel with others. This was because he wouldn't get angry easily. Once he got angry, he would immediately extinguish it. He wouldn't do something as useless as quarreling. Chapter 619. Ning Xuema shook her head. What she did with him didn't count as an argument, right? She just didn't know which of her words had provoked Master Han and made him leave in a huff. It seemed like her shield had blocked the most troublesome peach blossoms for him. He had achieved his goal, so he didn't care about her anymore. He threw her to his friend just like that. Did that mean she was free from now on? Ning Xuemo raised her hand and touched the snow-shaped cinnabar mole on her forehead. What about her heavenly marriage symbol? Also, what about her feet? "Miss Ning, is there something troubling you?" Rongyue Tianlan sensed that Ning Xuema had something on her mind. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Island Master Rongyue was the one who had thought of this method to remove the disguise technique. Perhaps he had other ways before her feet had recovered. She immediately spoke of her difficulties. "Island Master Rongyue, the rest of my body has recovered quite well, but my legs are still in their original strange state. You should have other ways, right?" Rongyue Tianlan was stunned and didn't speak for a while. He had clearly told Dizwa that once this method was started, it had to be removed from head to toe without stopping. Otherwise, all the previous efforts would be wasted, and it would be very difficult to recover from the parts that couldn't be recovered. He believed that Dizwa had listened to him. Why did he leave her with a future problem? Was he exhausted halfway? Or did he have a bad taste for old people's feet? Well, the last one seemed unlikely. Who would have such a strong taste for old people's feet? Exhaustion didn't seem right either. He remembered that after Dizwa had finished casting the technique on Ning Xuema, he had personally carried her out of the secret treatment room. Although Dizwa's face was pale, his footsteps were steady. It didn't seem like he was exhausted. Even if he had used up a lot of telekinesis, he should still have enough telekinesis to recover her feet. Then what about her feet? Could there be other reasons? "Miss Ning, your feet haven't recovered at all?" "Yes, they're still the same." "That's strange." Rongyue Tianlan frowned and pondered. He even forgot to wave his fan. Could it really be Dizwa's bad taste? Ning Xuema's heart sank. She looked at her anxiously. Does Island Master Rongyue also have no other way? Rongyue Tian was a little embarrassed and spread out her hands. "After all, I didn't see the specific situation." Before she could finish her sentence, her eyes widened. "Miss Ning." Without saying a word, Ning Xuema took off one of her shoes and socks and showed it to him. "Now you see it?" When going to the hospital to see a doctor, he naturally had to show the doctor his injury. Even if it was a slightly private place, he still had to show it to others sometimes, not to mention that it was just a foot. Ning Xuema was even more open about it. She was a modern woman, and it was common for modern women to walk barefoot. Rong Yuetian took a step back as if she had been stung by a scorpion. This lady is too bold. She actually showed her feet to other men. This was simply too audacious. Ning Xuema knew that the people of this era were more conservative and tried their best not to let other men see a woman's body. However, she didn't know that in this era, a woman's small feet were equivalent to her third sex. It was second only to her chest and private parts. Generally, only her husband had the right to see a woman's small feet, and it was on their wedding night. Chapter 620. But now Ning Xuema actually revealed her feet in such a grandiose manner, showing it back to him, a complete stranger. This was simply an eye-opener for Rong Yuetianlan. So much so that she even had a bit of doubt towards Ning Xuema's character. Rong Yuetianlan only glanced at her foot and quickly looked away. He said seriously, "Miss Ning, please don't be like this. Please put on your shoes and socks properly." He couldn't tease his friend's wife. Moreover, she was someone from Dizwa. He couldn't cross the line. Otherwise, Dizwa would definitely send him flying. Now that Island Master has seen the symptoms of my foot, is there a way to recover it? Ning Xuema put on her shoes and socks. She was most concerned about this. "I think, you can ask your great god Han about this." Ning Xuema lowered her eyes. "Island Master, you don't have a way?" He wanted to ask that great god, but before he could ask, that person had already disappeared, didn't he? Rong Yuetianlan thought for a moment. "Miss Ning, please wait for a moment." He decided to contact Dizwa first. Rong Yuetianlan went out. After a while he came back and saw Ning Xuema standing under the tree, talking to Kiran. The wind blew up her black hair and pink clothes. The fiery red leaves twirled around her. It was as beautiful as a painting. At this moment, he suddenly felt that this girl in front of him might be more suited to wear red clothes. This thought only flashed through his mind. He walked over. "Miss Ning." Ning Xuema stood up slightly and looked at him. "Island Master, have you contacted Mr. Han?" She actually guessed what he was doing just now. She was really smart. He shook his head. "Mr. Han might be in a hurry. I couldn't contact him." He and Dizwa had a sound transmission talisman. Usually they could keep in touch without any obstruction. This time he didn't know why, but there was no answer on the other end. He couldn't do anything at the moment. Ning Xuema smiled. "Forget it. In any case, thank you for your kindness in removing my disguise. Xuema will not disturb you any longer. Please send Xuema and Kiran out of the island." She wanted to leave. How could this be? Before Dizwa left, he had clearly entrusted her to him. If he let her go like this, where would he find her when Dizwa came back? "Miss Ning, your body hasn't fully recovered yet. You still need to rest for a few more days. Why don't you stay here and wait until you've recovered before you leave?" Ning Xuema shook her head. "I don't think so. I'll have to recuperate after I go out. Besides, I still need to find a doctor." She didn't believe that no one in this big world could cure her foot. She wanted others to look at her feet. Rong Yuetianlan did not dare to let her go and tried every means to make her stay. However, Ning Xuema had already made up her mind. Rong Yuetianlan had no choice but to use his trump card. "Miss Ning, you don't need to go to other places to seek treatment. I have a way." This sentence was like a shot of adrenaline for Ning Xuema. Her eyes immediately sparkled. Rong Yuetianlan looked at her pair of sparkling eyes and felt a little pressured. She muttered to herself for a moment and said, "There is a way, but this method is very torturous for you. That kind of torment is not something that ordinary people can endure. Therefore, I feel a little embarrassed and don't want to do it." Chapter 621. Ning Xuema took a deep breath and said, "Mister, why don't you tell me about it?" She had experienced all kinds of torment when she was a secret agent. Ordinary torment could not scare her. Rong Yuishanlin glanced at her and asked, "Was your foot seriously injured before? Did you use the Qilin armor to recover?" "Yes, that's right. Is this the reason why my foot could not recover?" Ning Xuema suddenly understood. Rong Yuishanlin nodded and said, "Yes. Although the Qilin armor healed your injury, it also changed the nature of the skin on your feet. Therefore, it could not be treated at the same time as other parts of your body. Ning Xuema understood. In other words, the Qilin armor had changed the genes on her feet. Different genes had different treatment methods. After knowing the exact cause, Rongyi Yuishinlin finally told her his treatment plan. His plan did sound cruel. However, Ning Xuema gritted her teeth and agreed to it in order to recover. Although this method made Ning Xuema suffer, it was not risky. Ning Xuema's life was not in danger. Therefore, Rongyi Yuishinlin contacted Han Shanyuer again to ask for his advice. After failing to contact him, Rongyi Yuishinlin decided on his own. Anyway, Ning Xuema agreed to it. He could not bear to let such a beautiful girl have such a big flaw. If Dizwa came back, the beauty would have recovered. At most, he would blame himself for being reckless and acting on his own. It should not be a big deal. Have you seen the boiling purple sludge? This time, Ning Xuema's horizons were broadened. The bubbling purple sludge was placed in a small pool made of special materials. A strong, pungent smell of medicine filled the entire room. It was so strong that it made people dizzy. Kiran tilted its head and looked at the pool of medicine. It could not suppress its curiosity and stretched out a claw to explore the sludge. Then, as if he had been struck by lightning, he quickly retreated and said, "It's hot. 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 Hot." Ning Xuema wore a set of special clothes and stood by the small pool. Looking at the boiling liquid, her heart was filled with uncertainty. The temperature is so high. Won't she be cooked if she jumps in? Rong Yuetian stood not far away from her. The temperature of this medicinal soup will always be at this temperature, and will not change. If you wear these clothes, your skin won't be scalded. But you can feel the temperature of this medicinal soup. Cough cough, I said that you will suffer a little. It's not too late for you to regret it now. My whole body is going to be soaked in. Rong Yuetianlan nodded her head cautiously. That's right. You have to let this medicinal paste completely cover your body. Even your face can't be exposed outside. After you jump in, the medicinal paste will wrap you up like an airtight clay figurine. You have to stay in there for 2 days. Your body will be reconstructed and your legs will naturally recover. At that time, we'll be able to shatter the godly soil and complete our mission. Why did it sound so much like making beggar's chicken? Ning Xuema was embarrassed. She was sure that Island Master Rongyue would not cheat her. For a pair of healthy legs, she would go all out. The clothes she was wearing were like soft silk armor. It wrapped her tightly from head to toe, but it was very breathable. She could also see and hear the sounds outside. She first tried to reach her hand into the mud. The scorching heat spread throughout her body like lightning. She gritted her teeth and endured for a moment. Then she retracted her hand and checked carefully. Her skin did not show any signs of being scalded. Oh. Chapter 622. Rongyue Tianlan was right. This was a living torture. She was about to go down when she thought of a terrible question. Island Lord Rongyue, after I go in, the mud will wrap me up like a clay figurine. Can I breathe in there? Rongyue Tianlan was stunned and suddenly slapped her head. Oh no. She really couldn't breathe in there. This method could treat people with high cultivation like her who could live without breathing, but ordinary people. Although she wouldn't be cooked in there, she would suffocate to death. Rongyue Tianlan broke out in cold sweat. Fortunately, Ning Xuemo remembered to ask in advance. If she recklessly jumped in just now, once she was suffocated in there, he wouldn't know. 2 days later, the mud shell would be broken and her corpse would be peeled out. At that time, the old man Dizwa would skin her alive. Miss Ning is right. I miscalculated. We will think of other ways, Rongyue Tianlan began to walk around the small pool. Ning Xuema looked at her clothes and then at the pool of mud. She frowned slightly. To be exact, this pool wasn't made of mud, but of medicinal paste. It was made from various rare herbs. Just preparing the herbs alone took a day. In addition, Rongyue Tianlan personally supervised the medical apprentices at the side in order to control the efficacy and temperature of the medicine. She didn't sleep the whole night. That was why this pool of medicinal paste was made. Also, this set of clothes was specially made for her using some kind of heavenly silk. A pair of gloves made of heavenly silk was already a priceless treasure, not to mention that she was dressed from head to toe. Rongyue Tianlan could be said to have put in a lot of effort to treat her feet. Everything was ready. Were they really going to give up like this? Not only was Rongyue Tianlan unwilling, but Ning Xuema was also unwilling. A day and a night had passed, and Han Shangyue hadn't moved. Rongyue Tianlan still couldn't contact him. Naturally, she couldn't wait for him to come back and ask for instructions. As for Ning Xuema, her husband had run away, so she didn't see anything wrong with him. She ate, drank, and enjoyed the scenery. She even played 2 games of chess with Rongyue Tianlan. Both of them had wins and losses, which made Rongyue Tianlan have a whole new level of respect for her chess skills. If it weren't for the fact that he was busy making the medicinal decoction, he would have liked to play chess with Ning Xuema for an entire day. Kiran looked at Ning Xuema, who was deep in thought, and then looked at Rongyi Yuishenlin, who was circling the pool like an ant on a hot pan. He said weakly, "Can you take out a few of my master's souls and leave one to guard the house? This way she won't feel any pain and won't need to breathe. When she's better, I'll put her soul in." Its words were like a bolt of lightning, striking Rongyue Tian so hard that she stopped in her tracks. He seemed to have been enlightened and was instantly enlightened. His figure flashed and he appeared beside the little Qilin. He slapped it on the head and said, "That's right. Why didn't I think of that? Haha, little apple, I didn't expect you to be so smart." In his excitement, he didn't control the strength of his hand accurately. This slap made Kiran somersault and almost rolled into the boiling pool. Fortunately, Ning Xuema's hands and eyes were quick. She managed to grab its horn in time and stopped its rolling momentum. Kiran was so scared that it broke out in a sweat. It jumped up and shouted angrily, "Are you trying to kill me?" Oh. Chapter 623. Rongyue Tianlan was awakened by Kiran's words, but he wasn't angry after being scolded by it. He patted its head comfortingly and said, "I'm sorry, my hand slipped." Kiran proudly turned its head to avoid his hand. It wouldn't let anyone pat its head. Since they had found a solution, the two of them didn't hesitate anymore. Before casting the spell, Rongyue Tianlan told Ning Xuema that he would take out her soul and seal it in the force field, leaving only one soul in her body to look after the house. The rest of her soul could stay in the house and watch from above. Ning Xuema nodded and looked at Rongyue Tianlan with a complicated gaze. She heard that this soul extraction technique could only be done by deities who had cultivated their telekinesis to the heavenly stage. It seemed that Rongyue Tianlan had also cultivated to the heavenly stage. However, probably because he was detached from worldly affairs and didn't enter the mortal world, he wasn't famous on this continent. If Han Shangyue hadn't brought her here, she wouldn't have known that there was such a person on this continent. It seemed that the information obtained by Chongkong Nation wasn't accurate. Those who were recorded were all famous. Weren't there a lot of people like Rongyue Tianlan in this continent? This was the so-called otherworldly expert. Then was the one who established the blood contract between her and the little Qilin also this kind of expert? It seemed that there were all kinds of hidden dragons and crouching tigers on this continent. She wondered what level Yunqi's telekinesis had reached. There was also Shui Ilan. That bastard's martial arts were also very strange. His cultivation might have also reached the heavenly stage. Thinking of Shui Ilan, she suddenly remembered something and her expression changed slightly. When she was removing the disguise technique, Han Shangyue touched all over her body. Then when this bastard changed her appearance, did he also touch her all over? Thinking of his hand touching all over her body, Ning Xuema had goosebumps all over her body. She paused and gritted her teeth to ask this question. Island Lord Rongyue, is the method to remove the disguise technique the same? Although it was a bit embarrassing to ask this question, if she didn't ask, she was afraid that she would always have doubts in her heart. Rongyue Tianlan shook her head and said, "That's not necessary. This is called a disguise technique, but in fact he gave you a kind of poison. After giving you this medicine, he used his own blood to activate this kind of poison. It will make you become an old woman in 2 hours. So he didn't touch her all over her body?" Ning Xuema finally. Who was this Shui Ilan? To be able to play Gu so well, could he be the ancestor of Gu? What about his own body? Did he also use this kind of disguise technique to become a wretched old man? Was it so troublesome for him? Rongyue Tian shook her head. I didn't see the person's specific appearance, so it's hard to judge. Maybe he himself, but UTS is right. This was indeed a possibility. Ning Shuima nodded her head. She secretly swore in her heart that if she ever saw that bastard Shui Lan again one day, she would definitely destroy his face that could bring disaster to a country, and then chop him into 8 pieces. That bastard almost destroyed her. She had a big grudge with him. The doubts in her heart were solved and Ning Shuima's heart relaxed a lot. Following Rongyue Tianlan's instructions, she sat down cross-legged. After a complicated operation by Rongyue Tianlan, after a quarter of an hour, Ning Shuima's soul was successfully extracted. Only a part of it was left in her body. Chapter 624. Rongyue Shenlin waved her sleeves again and set up a green spherical enchantment, carefully placing Ning Shuima's soul in it. It felt weird to appear in the state of a soul. Ning Shuima felt like a wisp of smoke, a gust of wind, floating in the enchantment. If the green enchantment didn't stop her, she might have flown out involuntarily. She curiously lay on the enchantment and watched Rongyue Shenlin raise her hand to lift her sitting body in the air, and slowly put her down into the bubbling mud. She watched as her body was slowly swallowed by the mud inch by inch. The mud in the small pool seemed to have smelled something delicious and surged in the direction of her body, swirling around. Gradually a mud shell formed around her body, like a small round coffin rolling up and down in the mud. This scene made all of Ning Shuima's hair stand on end. Fortunately, her soul was lifted out. Fortunately, she couldn't feel it. Otherwise, the feeling of rolling and steaming in there was really unbearable. She just didn't know if her body would be cooked after breaking the mud shell. Steamed beauty was also a good dish. She looked at Rongyue Shenlin. Rongyue Shenlin was standing by the pool, afraid that something would happen to her, and he wouldn't be able to explain himself, so he had been quietly guarding her. From time to time, he used his consciousness to sense Ning Shuima's body in the mud shell, probing her vitality. His consciousness was also quite taxing, and he also had to feel the high temperature inside, so every time he probed, he would sweat profusely. It looked very tiring. Ning Shuima didn't feel anything. Her soul stayed in the green enchantment, but she felt a little bored. She looked at Kiran for a while and then looked at Rongyue Shenlin for a while. She saw Rongyue Shenlin's hard work. A person with such high skills could make it so hot just by probing with her consciousness. If her original soul was inside, she was afraid that she would have wanted to commit suicide. Fortunately, there was Kiran's reminder. At the critical moment, it turned out that there were times when it didn't drop the chain. Ning Shuima looked at Rongyue Shenlin with gratitude, and when she looked at Kiran it was gentle. Kiran was originally very playful, but at this time it was worried about its master. Its eyes were also wide open, staring at the mud shell without blinking. Ning Shuima's main body was in the state of a soul. If it didn't use special methods, it couldn't see it all the time. In the first 4 hours, Kiran used telepathy to chat with Ning Shuima every 15 minutes to ask her about her situation. Naturally, Ning Shuima's answer reassured it. Rongyue Shenlin was able to see her soul. In these 2 hours, he would occasionally raise his eyes to look at Ning Shuima, who was inside the barrier. Seeing that she was fine, he felt relieved. There was a sign that she was gradually was Shuima's body. After Rongyue Shenlin kept watch here for 3 hours, he saw that everything was indeed back to normal. It was a little boring for him to keep watch here. He took out the chessboard, sat there and played chess with himself. Ning Shuima watched from inside the enchantment. She was itching to play, so she spoke up to represent one side to play. It was Rongyue Shenlin's first time playing chess with a soul. It was quite fun, so he let her represent the black side, and he took the white piece himself. One person and one soul played chess there. Ning Shuima was in the state of a soul, and her mind wasn't as clear as it was normal. So when she played chess with Rongyue Shenlin this time, she lost 2 out of 3 games. Chapter 625. Playing Go consumed a lot of brain power. Ning Shuima was in the state of a soul, so the consumption was particularly large. After 5 games, she was so tired that she wanted to sleep. Rongyue Shenlin finally noticed her discomfort. He saw that she was swaying in the force field and couldn't maintain her shape. She was obviously in a state of overexertion. He couldn't help but hit his head with the fan. For so many years he had been dealing with the strongest people. No matter what he did, there was always a kind of habitual thinking in it. He always forgot that Ning Xuema was just an ordinary person. An ordinary person's soul couldn't be so exhausted. He hurriedly put away the chessboard. Miss Ning, your soul will be hurt like this. It's better to recuperate in the force field. You can meditate to recover. Souls could meditate? Ning Xuema tried to regulate her breath in the force field. She closed her eyes slightly and meditated for a while. Sure enough, the tiredness lessened a lot. Rongyi Yuishinlin saw her like this and breathed a sigh of relief. He used his consciousness to check her body again. Her body was also fine. He was about to find something to do to pass the time when a child reported from outside. Island Master, Palace Master Yunqi is here. Yunqi actually came back. It seemed that she was going to get rid of the knot in her heart. Rongyue Tianlan's heart was filled with joy. In the end, he was worried about his old friend. So he instructed Ning Xuema to focus on recuperating inside the barrier. When the time came, he would naturally let her out. He turned back to look for Kiran, but found that the little guy's shadow was gone. It turned out that Kiran saw that Ning Xuema's soul had been playing chess with Rongyi Yuishinlin. It really had nothing to do with it. It was also a playful thing, so it ran out to play. Rongyi Yuishinlin didn't see it, but he guessed that it had run away. He couldn't help but rub his forehead with the fan. He gave Ning Xuema a few more instructions before going out. Only Ning Xuema was left in the big hall. She sat in the force field and meditated for a while. Then she looked at the mud shell rolling in the mud. She yawned in boredom. This kind of time was a bit unbearable. She might as well sleep first. Rongyue Tianlan had said before that sleeping was also a way for souls to cultivate. She simply lay down inside the force field. The force field set up by Rongyi Yuishinlin was very authentic. It could change its shape according to her movements inside. When she lay down, it also became a long strip. It flowed around Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema couldn't help poking it with her finger. It was soft like a balloon. She poked a few more times and a question flashed through her mind. I wonder if this barrier will break as easily as an eggshell? She poked a few more times out of boredom. In her boredom, her thoughts began to drift. Where did that bastard Shuilan go after he escaped? If she were to catch him one day, she would make sure that he would often be immobilized and tortured by others. Was Han Shanyue really not going to turn back? It had already been a day and a night, and he hadn't even contacted his good friends. As expected of the legend of this continent, he was able to let go so easily. Looks like it's time for my shield concubine to retire. But what about the wedding? Oh right, she was now in the state of a soul. Was the cinnabar mole still there? She couldn't help but raise her hand to touch it. In the state of a soul, her sense of touch wasn't sensitive. She touched nothing. She smiled to herself. The soul had no physical body. She couldn't touch it. She couldn't even sense where her body was. It seemed that she could take any shape she wanted. Chapter 626. Ning Xuema curled up into a ball, stretched into a straight line like a stick, and then into the shape of a flower. She realized that as long as she thought about it, the shape of her soul would immediately change, and it would be exactly the same as what she imagined. That was fun. This feeling was not something that she could experience at any time. She suddenly had an idea. Could she turn into a sharp sword and cut through the wizardry barrier? Just as she thought about it, she heard a soft thud. Her body became light, and a green light flashed in front of her eyes. When she realized what had happened, she was already outside the wizardry barrier. Ning Xuema was speechless. Wasn't this barrier too much like a piece of paper? She had just thought about it, and she immediately broke through the barrier. Was her soul too powerful, or was his wizardry barrier too weak? Ning Xuema could not figure it out at the moment. She circled around the hall and looked at the mud shell. She could not help but fly down to take a closer look. Unexpectedly, before she could really get close to the mud shell, she felt a strong suction force from the mud shell, and it suddenly pulled her down. Ning Xuema was almost pulled down by the suction force. She hurriedly flew up and finally broke free from the suction force. She was still in a state of shock as she stuck her body to the wizardry barrier and looked at the mud shell. Suddenly, she realized that the mud shell was her body. Once she got close to it, she would naturally be attracted to it, Damn it, I was almost sucked in. I almost went in there to taste the high temperature and the feeling of being suffocated to death. She did not dare to get close to the mud shell. Her body floated up and circled around the hall a few times. She felt that her body was a little scattered, as if her arms and legs were going to be separated from her body. Oh no! Her soul was going to be scattered. Once the soul was scattered, she did not know if it could be gathered again. This was Ning Xuema's last thought in the hall. After this thought, her vision blurred, and she did not know anything else. The blood-red fog. There was no end to it. The world was completely covered by the blood-red fog, and the air was filled with the smell of blood. Ning Xuema felt as if she was walking in such a blood fog. From time to time, all kinds of strange noises could be heard coming from the blood fog. There were screams that sounded like humans and beasts. In the depths of the fog, there was even the sound of teeth tearing through flesh. The combination of these strange sounds made the hair of those who walked among them stand on end. Blood mist filled the air, and the gloomy aura was chilling. This place seemed to have been abandoned by God. Sunlight could no longer shine here. It was terrifyingly cold. Ning Xuema could not help but shrink back. Although she was bold, being alone in such an environment, she still felt a little scared. She couldn't tell the direction in the fog, so she could only choose a random direction and run. She couldn't wait to get out of this demonic area. The blood mist in front of her suddenly rolled like waves, and there seemed to be footsteps rushing towards her. She was stunned and instinctively dodged to the side. A young man in white rushed out of the blood mist in front of her. This young man in white seemed to have just gone through a fight. His white robe was stained with blood, and his hair was messy, covering his face. Ning Xuema could not see his appearance clearly, but she could faintly feel that this young man should be very beautiful. This young man looked to be around 12 or 13 years old, but his skills were already extraordinary. As he ran, there were all kinds of beasts that came out of the blood mist to bite him, but they were all dealt with in a few moves. Chapter 627. Ning Xuema was hiding in the dark. She had only seen him fight a few times, and she was sure that this young man was a ruthless character. In the battle, he was willing to let himself be injured in order to quickly finish off his enemies. For example, there was a very cunning snake. It flew around the young man like lightning, and when the young man was fighting with other monsters, it would bite the young man. Once it was bitten, it would run away immediately. It did not want to continue fighting. After the young man suffered a few losses, he simply ignored it and focused on fighting with other monsters. He was attacked a few more times by the snake. The snake did not suffer any losses. The more it attacked, the bolder it became. Slowly, its body could stay on the young man's body for a longer time when it bit him. At the last time when it bit the young man's skin, it sucked a mouthful of his blood. A sudden change happened at that moment. The young man, who had been ignoring it, suddenly reached out and grabbed the snake's vital point. The snake was shocked when its vital point was caught. It struggled in his hand and said, "Old Six, you can't kill me. I'm your younger brother. I'm your younger brother." Younger brother? The young man chuckled. Ning Xuema felt a chill in her heart. For some reason, she felt that the young man's laughter was very cold. It was as if he was going to make a big move in the next moment. Ning Xuema was right. After the young man laughed, he directly broke the snake's neck. The snake's blood sprayed all over him. This scene was very cruel, but Ning Xuema did not know why she was very excited when she saw it. It was as if she also liked the taste of blood. She could not help but follow the young man. She watched him kill in the blood fog and saw the blood of all kinds of monsters sprayed on his body. She watched his white clothes turn into red clothes. The blood fog seemed to be endless. The sound of ghosts crying in the blood fog became louder. The young man encountered more ambushes. After all, he was not made of iron. His body seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. Finally, after being ambushed by another monster, he sat down with a thud. The blood mist seemed to have faded a little. 5 green-robed men walked out of the blood mist one after another and surrounded the young man from before. From their conversation, Ning Xuema knew that the 5 green-robed men were the elder brothers of the young man. They were reprimanding the young man for his evil deed of killing his brothers. The young man didn't say a word at first, but after they finished scolding him, he smiled gently. Ning Shuama couldn't see his face clearly, but for some reason, she felt that his smile was very enchanting. After the young man smiled, he only said a few words. You guys never treated me as a brother. You called me a bastard. His words made Ning Shuama feel sad for no reason. It was as if she had seen the ugly duckling in fairy tales as expected. Those youths had mocking expressions on their faces. You're a bastard. Although you were hatched from the same nest as us, you were different from us from the moment you were born. You are white, and you have an ugly lump on your head. It's already very kind of mother to let you stay, yet you still want to ask for more? How dare you covet the position of the king of my clan? With just you? Ning Shuama calmly listened to their conversation, and finally understood what was going on. This young man should also be from the snake clan. He was born in the same nest as these green-robed men and was discriminated against since he was young. However, he was very talented and ambitious. She did not know why he let it slip that he wanted to fight for the position of the Snake King when he grew up. This sentence brought him a fatal disaster, and the king of the Snake Clan issued an order to kill him. Chapter 628. 10,000 snakes moved out and formed this blood fog array, wanting to kill this young man inside. Even his so-called blood brothers were among the snakes that wanted to kill him. These 5 brothers were also very cunning. They only appeared when the young man in white was exhausted. They obviously wanted to take advantage of the situation. Not a single word was exchanged. Another bloody battle ensued. That young man was clearly so weak that he was about to die. But at this moment, it was as if he had been injected with stimulants and was reinvigorated. Once again, he fought with his life on the line against these 5 people. Ning Shuama crossed her arms and watched from the side. She began to admire this young man. Ruthless, ruthless. He was also very scheming and had many tricks up his sleeves when facing his enemies. His weakness just now was not real. It was just a ploy to lure the snake out of its hole. Now that the snake was lured out, he naturally fought with his life on the line in the battle. His tricks were endless. Slowly, the 5 brothers who originally had the upper hand were killed one by his tricks. When only one of the 5 brothers was left, he finally realized that things were not going well. He turned around and wanted to run, but was captured by him. After that person was captured, he begged the young man in white, playing the family card. He said that he was forced by others to come, but in his heart, he had always treated him as a brother. This person was very eloquent. He recalled the past with this young man. From these words and the reaction of the young man in white, Ning Shuama knew that the one who survived was this young man's 3rd brother. He usually took good care of him. For example, when he was punished to kneel for no reason, 3rd brother had secretly given him food. Although it was just scraps of food, it was enough for him to survive and not starve to death. There were 7 or 8 similar incidents. The young man's murderous aura finally calmed down. He said, "All right, on account of our past relationship, I'll spare your life." Then, he let go of the hand that was holding his 3rd brother's neck. Ning Shuama's heart jumped. Her intuition told her that this was bad. Her intuition had always been very accurate. This time was no exception. Before the 3rd brother's body landed on the ground, the poisonous blade in his hand had already pierced through the young man's abdomen. That young man in white was also ruthless. Even after suffering such a heavy injury, he did not care. Instead, he suddenly pounced forward and grabbed his 3rd brother's neck. This time he didn't show any mercy at all. Instead, he directly cut off all of 3rd brother's chances of survival. His 3rd brother, like his other brothers, returned to his original form after death and remained motionless. Due to his reckless charge, the dark green poisonous blade pierced through his body and came out from his back. Fresh blood dyed the remaining white of his white robe red, and the white robe was completely dyed red. After all, he was still a child. After killing so many people in one breath, he finally couldn't hold on any longer and fell to the ground with a plop. Perhaps his ruthlessness just now had scared off the other pursuers. This young man had been lying on the ground for a full quarter of an hour, but no one took the opportunity to attack him. He struggled a few times on the ground, looking like he really wanted to get up. However, he was obviously exhausted from his injuries this time. He struggled a few times but still couldn't get up. He simply lay there and raised his blood-stained hand to look at it. Why? Why can't you tolerate me? Why? He seemed to be laughing and crying at the same time. His hands were stained with someone else's blood or his own. Drops of blood dripped down. Chapter 629. Fresh blood dripped onto the neck and body of the white-clothed youth. His entire body seemed to have been fished out from blood. More people walked out from the blood fog. These people obviously wanted to harm him as well. They fanned out and surrounded him. There were more than 10 of them. Their eyes flashed with cold murderous intent. The youth naturally sensed the approach of these people, but he was already in despair. He did not want to get up again. Blood flowed like a river, but he could not fight for any chance of survival. No matter how hard he tried, he would not be able to escape death today. Probably with this thought in mind, the youth lay there without moving. He just closed his eyes slightly. Clang! Clang! A few zither sounds suddenly came from the blood fog. The zither sounds were clear and melodious. It was not a tune, but it strangely dispersed the blood fog and returned everything to its original state. The zither sounds came from above Ningxuama's head, startling Ningxuama. She looked in the direction of the zither sounds and saw a big tree not far behind her. The branches and leaves of the tree were all withered and burnt, leaving only the bare tree trunk like a horned dragon. On the tree trunk, a young girl in red sat diagonally. She did not know why, but the moment Ningxuama saw the young girl in red, her heart felt like it was hit by a big hammer. The young girl was dressed in a fiery red dress. She wore a hood of the same color on her head. Her face was hidden in the shadow of the hood, making it impossible for people to see her face clearly. On her knees was a dark blue zither. The color of the zither was like the waves of the sea. It shone faintly under the moonlight. The young girl was leaning against the tree trunk. Her hands were lazily strumming the zither strings. Her bare feet were swaying there. It was a full moon night. Under the moonlight she looked like an elf, a dark elf. The people who were about to surround the youth became restless. Countless gazes looked towards the young girl. The dying youth also looked over. From his direction, the most conspicuous thing he could see was her feet. Her small feet were as white as snow, and there were silver chains around her ankles. There were 2 small silver bells hanging from the chains, and as her small feet moved, the silver bells jingled. Coupled with the sound of the zither that she casually played, there was actually a kind of soul-stirring power that made everyone's eyes widen. The sound of the zither seemed to have a great influence on these people. Their tempers became impetuous, and they all asked for the girl's name. The young girl casually plucked the strings of the zither and said in a cold voice, "So many people bullying one person, it's really annoying." She didn't know if it was because of the sound of the zither, but the group of people became very irritable. This girl's ordinary sentence actually provoked 4 or 5 men to rush towards her. "If you don't like it, then stay together. Play with us." Those 4 or 5 people's kung fu was obviously not bad. Their figures were like a whirlwind as they rushed over. The young girl was not in a hurry. When they got close, her fingers suddenly plucked the zither strings. This time it wasn't a musical note that came out, but a light red wave of light. This light red wave of light was like a meteor or lightning. After the light wave flashed, the 4 or 5 people who rushed over had already lost their heads. Their bodies ran forward 2 steps on the ground, and then fell to the ground with a loud bang. "Devil ancestor! Devil ancestor! She is the devil ancestor! God, she is the devil ancestor!" The rest of the people shouted. The white-clothed youth lying on the ground suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes flashed with passion as he looked at the young girl. Chapter 630. Those people didn't care about attacking the young man anymore. They retreated step by step, obviously wanting to escape. The girl in red looked at the young man and smiled. "I've taken care of a few for you. The rest is up to you. Of course, you can let them go as long as you don't have to worry about the consequences." The young man took a deep breath and finally stood up again. "I won't let them go." "Okay, then it's up to you." Her fingers plucked the strings again, and waves of light red waves gushed out. In the blink of an eye, a barrier was set up around them, stopping those who wanted to escape. The girl said happily, No one is allowed to leave until the winner is decided. Don't worry, no matter who wins or loses this time, I won't interfere. The final winner can stay. Everyone looked at each other. Everyone knew that this time it was not about winning or losing, but about their lives. Losing meant death. It was yet another battle of life and death. One by one, the young man's men fell to the ground. Flowers of blood burst out one after another. Every flower of blood represented the end of a life. It was cruel but beautiful. After an unknown amount of time, when the dust once again settled, the large field was littered with the corpses of several long snakes. Only 2 people were left standing. One was an old man in green, and the other was the young man in red. The young man in red was indeed an arrow at the end of its flight. Although he was standing, there were deep and shallow wounds all over his body. His body was shaking, as if he would fall down immediately if the wind blew. Ning Shuima knew that she seemed to have entered an illusion. In this illusion she could see other people, but they obviously couldn't see her. She could just stand aside and watch. Until now, she couldn't help but admire the young man's stubbornness. He was clearly exhausted to the extreme, and his kung fu was clearly not the strongest among these people, but it was precisely because of this that he was able to kill each and every one of them. Ruthless, cunning, and daring to fight. He had all these factors. He was not tall enough, but the murderous aura he exuded made the old man in front of him tremble. That old man was more cunning. Just now, when everyone went forward to besiege him, he stayed in the outer circle and only attacked the young man when he was cold. Therefore, his stamina consumption was the least and he was still in peak condition. He circled around the young man, looking for his weakness. The young man's eyes were almost covered with blood, but he didn't dare to blink. He didn't even dare to wipe it with his hands. He was afraid that if he raised his hand, he would give others a chance to deal him a fatal blow. A drop of blood finally rolled down from the tip of his eyebrows and fell into his eyes. The youth couldn't help but blink. The old man took advantage of this opportunity to rush over and slash at the young man's neck. Ding! The sound of a zither suddenly rang out in the air. The old man jumped in fright and quickly turned to look at the young girl who had been watching from the side. But before he could see the girl's face clearly, his arms suddenly flew out. That young man had taken advantage of this moment to make a move. His grasp of the opportunity was extremely precise. If he had acted a second earlier or a second later, he would not have been able to achieve this effect. It was a perfect match for the young girl's zither. Chapter 631. The old man suddenly opened his eyes wide and stared at the young girl unwillingly. You said that you wouldn't help either side. The young girl laughed. Her laughter was as clear as a silver bell. I didn't help. I just played the zither because my hands were itchy. The old man wanted to say something else, but he would never be able to because the young man's sword slashed across and cut off his neck cleanly. All the pursuers were dead. The young man finally breathed a sigh of relief. He raised his head and looked at the young girl in red. Devil ancestor? The young girl in red shook her small feet and tilted her head to look at him. She smiled. Take a guess. The young man was stunned. The young girl laughed again. Her laughter was like a silver bell, and it still had the innocence of a young girl. I've seen a good show today. All right, you can run for your life. Her figure flashed and fluttered like a red cloud. She landed lightly and turned around to leave. The young man immediately took a step forward. I haven't thanked Devil Ancestor for saving my life. The young girl tilted her head and looked at him. I didn't do anything. It's mainly you who saved yourself. She looked at him up and down. I think you're not bad. You're a talent. How about you follow me? The young man was stunned. He didn't expect her to make such a request. What? You can be my subordinate. I can teach you martial arts. The young girl smiled. The young man instinctively wanted to refuse. However, the young girl suddenly waved her sleeve at him. A red light flashed and the young man disappeared. A small white snake covered in bruises appeared on the spot. Although it was a white snake, there was a small bulge on its head. It looked a little funny. The young girl seemed to be stunned. She bent down and picked up the small white snake. She put it in front of her eyes and looked at it carefully. The small white snake seemed to be shy. It curled up its body and hissed. It was flustered and exasperated. It threatened, "Let go of me." It struggled in her small hands, but it couldn't get out of her 5 fingers no matter how hard it struggled. The young girl's small hand poked the small bulge on its head. "Your small bulge is so pretty." The small white snake almost wanted to hide its head under its body. Its voice was even more angry. "Don't make fun of me." "I'm not making fun of you. I've never seen a snake with a bump on its head." The young girl giggled, her laughter even more crisp than a silver bell. "But it's really pretty. I like it." The scales on the little snake's body were almost red. It tried its best to return to its human form, but it was obviously unable to do so under the girl's control. "If you laugh at me again, I'll kill you too." In its anger, it finally revealed its childish nature and said something that was not very intimidating. The girl obviously did not take its threat to heart. She looked at it carefully for a moment and seemed to have discovered a new continent. She pointed at the upper part of its body and said, "Ah, you have several small bumps on your body. 1, 2, 3, 6, 6. Including the one on your head, there are 7 in total." The little white snake's entire body started to tremble. These few bags were the things that it wanted to hide the most, but it didn't expect that the girl would count them out one by one. It suddenly said, "You are not the demon ancestor. The demon ancestor should be dignified and powerful, not so mischievous and mischievous." The girl was stunned. She suddenly laughed. "You have good eyesight. Let me go as soon as possible. Otherwise, I don't care who you are. I'll take your life." The small white snake was angered by her teasing. Chapter 632. Bullshit. The girl stretched out her beautiful finger and flicked it. "I can pinch you to death with a wave of my hand." The white snake was speechless. It was still a child after all, and it was about to faint from anger. "Hey, do you want to be my subordinate or not? If you follow me, no one will dare to bully you in the future. Being my subordinate is very good." The girl spoke again and stretched out her hand to pinch the soft bulge on its body as if she had found a happy toy. The white snake had a proud temper, so it simply straightened its body and pretended to be dead, no longer speaking. "Are you really not willing? I was the one who saved you. Logically speaking, shouldn't you repay me with your body?" The girl pinched the small bulge on its head again. Her last sentence shocked the white snake. It shook its body and moved its head to avoid the girl's mischievous fingers. "Didn't you say that you didn't save me? Did I save myself? I don't need to repay you with my body. You have a backbone." The girl laughed again and finally let it go. She threw it to the ground again. "I don't like to force people. If you don't want to, then forget it." She turned around and was about to leave. "Wait." The young man's voice came from behind. The girl turned around and tilted her head to look at him who had returned to his human form. "You regret it? You agreed to be my subordinate?" The young man took a breath and said seriously, "I won't be your subordinate, but I can always be by your side to protect you and not let anyone bully you." The girl snorted disdainfully at his words. "Protect me? With your martial arts, you can't even resist 2 of my fingers." "I will become stronger." The young man said word by word. "I just lack opportunities. I am not worse than anyone else." The girl slowly turned around, and her expression seemed to become serious. "You have a backbone. I will wait for the day you become stronger." Her sparkling eyes fell on him. The young man straightened his body and looked at her with the same stubbornness. The girl smiled and tilted her head to look at him. "I can take you in. As for whether you can stay by my side, that depends on whether you have the ability to do so in the future." She raised her hand and flicked her finger lightly. There was a faint explosion in the air, and 6 men in black appeared out of thin air. They stood around the young girl and bowed together. "Master, what are your orders?" The girl glanced back at the youth covered in blood and said indifferently, "This person. I'll leave him to you. 10 years later I will see the results of your training." He turned around and disappeared. The young man stood where he was and looked at the place where she disappeared. His fingers slowly clenched into fists. Ning Shuima also stared blankly at this scene. That young man looked so down and out that she had a faint impulse to comfort him. She took a step forward, and the scene in front of her completely changed. What happened next made Ning Xuema feel like she was watching a fast-paced movie. Scenes after scenes flashed by. And in every scene, the red-clothed girl was wearing a red dress and a hood. She was either playing the zither under the moonlight, dancing under a large tree, or sitting high up in the palace, hugging her knees and looking up at the moon in a daze. This girl's laughter was like a silver bell. She looked very lively and even naive, but it was also filled with a faint sense of loneliness and desolation. It was a kind of loneliness of being high up with no friends and no confidants. Chapter 633. The lone wolf-like young man in white no longer appeared in the picture, but the point of view seemed to be the young man in white's point of view. He was in a humble dark place, looking up at the bright red, the only bright color in his life. The picture flashed very quickly, as if the years were shuttling back and forth. Winter and summer alternated in the picture. In this scene, Ning Xuema still couldn't see the young girl's face clearly. She only faintly felt that she was very beautiful. Her face was hidden very deeply in the hood. Occasionally, she would see her black hair covering her forehead. That black hair was like black satin, leaving a deep impression. The young girl seemed to like the color red very much. Every time she appeared, it was a deep red. Her smile and frown seemed to light up the dim background. Whose eyes would it burn? Ning Xuema was also looking at the young girl. She didn't know what to feel in her heart. It was as if this young girl was her former self. It was so familiar that it made her heart palpitate. Finally, the scene slowed down in the midst of an assassination. The young girl seemed to have a lot of enemies. She was often assassinated. Fortunately, she was highly skilled and had a secret guard by her side to protect her. Basically, every assassination attempt ended in failure. Because of the frequent assassinations and the assassin's skills, the secret guards by her side were replaced very quickly. The old ones fell and the new ones took their place. Occasionally, the young girl was forced to make a move. Every time she made a move, it was a fatal move. She didn't leave any leeway for her opponents. She basically used the sound of the zither to kill people. Every light red wave was a fatal weapon. Like a harvester, she reaped the lives of those assassins. After every operation, she seemed to be a little dejected and tired. She stared at her hands for a long time, lost in thought. Then she would wash her hands over and over again, as if that could wash away the blood and the unpleasant past. She didn't say a word, but Ning Xuema understood her thoughts in an instant. She didn't want to kill people. She didn't want to be contaminated with blood, but the situation forced her. If she didn't kill people, they would kill her. Every assassination was a battle of life and death. She was merciful to her enemies, but she was ruthless to herself. It was another full moon night. Another assassination was coming. This time there were many assassins and they were all very powerful. The guards around the red-clothed girl fell down one by one. The red-clothed girl stood high up, and the moonlight stretched her lonely shadow very, very long. She finally took out her zither again. Just as she was about to play, the scene below suddenly took a shocking turn. A red shadow and a sharp sword pierced into the group of assassins. Faint golden waves of light flashed among the black assassins. Every wave of light would cause an assassin to fall. Blood splattered everywhere, and miserable cries rang out one after another. The red-clothed girl stopped and tilted her head to look at the scene below. After an hour, the killing finally stopped. All the assassins had fallen, and not a single one was left alive. A handsome man stood in the middle of the field. His red robes were dazzling. The moment Ning Xuema saw the man's face, her heart raced. Shuilan. This guy was actually Shuilan. Why is this bastard here? Although she knew that the other party couldn't see her, Ning Xuema still subconsciously hid in the shadows. The red-clothed man was very handsome. After the dust settled, he raised his hand and flicked his robes. Chapter 634. He did not know what material his robe was made of. There was some blood splashed on it, but when he flicked it, it all fell off. The blood flew like rain, but there was not a speck of dust on his body. He smiled at the girl. His smile was alluring. "Are you okay?" The girl did not seem to recognize him. She tilted her head and looked at him. "Who are you?" The red-clothed man's eyes darkened. You don't remember me? The girl looked at him again. After a while she said, You seem familiar. 10 years ago I said that I would become stronger. I would stand by your side and protect you. The red-clothed man looked disappointed, but his tone was still calm. His tone was gentle and had a faint scholarly air. The girl paused for a moment. She seemed to finally remember. You are the little white snake with a bump on its head. You finally remember. The red-clothed man smiled. His smile was like a flower blooming. It was bright and beautiful in the spring. It's me. Can I stand by your side now? The girl tilted her head and looked at him. She also smiled. I didn't misjudge you back then. She seemed to be emotional. After 10 years you have grown up and become stronger. The red-clothed man did not say anything. He only looked at her as if he was looking at the only salvation in his bleak life. The girl looked at him again. What's your name? The red-clothed man's expression darkened. I don't have a name. My brothers used to call me Old Six. In the Demon Palace's secret guard training ground, they called me Number 6. The girl did not say anything for a moment. She raised her head and looked at the moon in the sky. Then she looked at him who was standing quietly in the night. She seemed to have thought of something and smiled. The night is waning. Your clothes are red like fire. I will give you a name. How about Shui Yilan? The red-clothed man's eyes lit up. Thank you for giving me a name. Then I will be Shui Yilan. Is it Shui from Bai Shui? The girl seemed to be stunned. A secret guard appeared in the dark and shouted at the red-clothed man. How dare you? Who do you think you are? How dare you have the same surname as the princess? The red-clothed girl glanced at the secret guard. The secret guard seemed to be shocked. He bowed. I have crossed the line. The girl only replied to him with one word. Get lost. The shadow guard quietly retreated. The girl smiled at the red-clothed man. You were originally a white snake. Snow is also your true color. Let's call you Shui Yilan. Thank you, princess. Shui Yilan bowed. His every movement was filled with poetic elegance. Then can Shui Yilan follow the princess? The young girl stretched and stood up. All right, you can be the leader of the guards by this seat side. It turned out that the name Shui Yilan was given to him by this princess. Ningshuama looked at the two people standing above her. Suddenly, she felt somewhat perplexed. When did this happen? Why would she see this? Could this be a dream? But why was the main character in her dream someone else? While she was lost in thought, a pair of cold eyes suddenly looked in her direction. Who's there? Ningshuama subconsciously raised her head. Her eyes met with Shui Yilan's eyes. She was shocked. He could see her. How could it be? Wasn't she always a passerby in this scene? A red shadow flashed and a pale golden light shot towards Ningshuama. Chapter 635. Ningshuama was shocked. Just as she was about to dodge, a strong gust of wind suddenly rose around her. Fog filled the sky and covered everything. There was a sorrowful atmosphere around her. In the thick fog there was the sound of a zither. A woman was singing. The sun rises in the east, my red dress is like fire. The spring flowers are bright. The night is waning. Dancing gracefully, my heart is filled with sorrow. The past is hard to recall, the zither is hard to reconcile. The song was so sorrowful that it almost made people cry. Ningshuama also felt sad in her heart. Suddenly her vision blurred. The thick fog disappeared, and so did the beauty in red. At this moment, Ningshuama's mind suddenly became hazy. The scenery she saw just now seemed to have disappeared along with the fog. There was nothing left. She looked around blankly and realized that she was in a cave. The cave was not small. The walls of the cave were made of white crystal stones. They were clear and sparkling, shining with a faint white light in the dark night. There was a crystal bed in the cave. Although it was called a crystal bed, it was actually a big bed-shaped white crystal stone. On the crystal bed, a man in red sat quietly. Ningshuama suddenly took a step back. Shui Yilan. This man was none other than Shui Yilan. If his appearance in her dream was still a little immature, then at this moment he was the one Ningshuama was used to seeing. He seemed to be seriously injured. There were faint bloodstains on the corner of his pale lips. His face was unusually pale. He seemed to be meditating but also seemed to be in a nightmare. His long eyelashes were drooping, slightly trembling like the wings of a butterfly. Ning Xuema looked at his tightly knitted eyebrows and trembling lips. She finally came to a conclusion. This bastard was in a nightmare. And his injuries were not light. This was a good opportunity given by God to get rid of him. She subconsciously wanted to shoot some kind of hidden weapon like a poisonous needle. However, when she raised her hand to touch it, her palm passed through her body. It was so light that she did not touch anything. What was going on? She subconsciously looked down and realized that she did not have a body. She was shocked. What was going on? Out of habit, she reached out her hand to touch the crystal beside her, but she couldn't see where her palm was. She was shocked again as a thought flashed through her mind. Could it be that he was still a soul? She also finally vaguely remembered that because she wanted to heal her injuries, she had allowed Yu Tianlan to bring out her soul. She had unintentionally broken that barrier. And then what was she doing here? What is this place? Was this a dream of her soul? Or was it real? Ning Xuema felt like she was in a mess. She looked at Shuilan again. His eyelashes were trembling even harder. It seemed like he was about to wake up. She couldn't be here. Right now she was only a soul body. Even if Shuilan was heavily injured, she wouldn't be able to do anything to him. If this pervert were to discover her, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to protect her soul. She had to leave. She couldn't stay here any longer. She had to leave. Even if she went to Yi Qingwan's cave residence, it would be safer than staying here. She had just finished thinking about it when a gust of wind suddenly appeared in the cave. It directly swept her away and disappeared. Momo. Shuilan, who was sitting there quietly, suddenly called out softly and opened his eyes. The cave had been lonely and cold for 1,000 years. He was the only one in the huge cave. There was no one else. Shuilan sat there quietly for a moment. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. It was unknown whether it was a bitter smile or something else. Oh. Chapter 636. From the moment he opened his eyes in this world, Shuilan seemed to be alone. He could not remember the past, nor could he plan for the future. Fortunately, he still remembered that he was Shuilan, and that he had a black wave zither by his side. After he woke up from the crystal coffin, he kept having a recurring dream. In the dream there were swords and sabers, but when he woke up, he could not remember anything. He could only vaguely remember that song that made him feel sad every time he sang it. In the dream he had forgotten everything except for the melody and lyrics of the song. He could even remember every word. Later, when he sang it himself, he slightly changed a few words, making him feel that the lyrics finally fit his mood. The past that he could not remember made him crazy. He faintly felt that this dream should be related to the things that happened before he was sealed, but he had forgotten everything as soon as he woke up. Damn it! He cursed under his breath and slowly stood up from the crystal bed. His blood was boiling in his chest, making him almost spit out blood again. He clenched his fist. His eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. He thought that he would not meet any opponents in this world, but he did not expect that there would be Han Shangyue. That bastard's martial arts were obviously higher than his. Previously, he had almost destroyed his zither in the palace, causing him to be injured and have no choice but to hide. He did not think that he would meet him again. Using the forbidden technique continuously had caused him to be heavily injured, and in the carriage he was hit by Han Shanyue's palm, causing him to be even more injured. Han Shanyue had indeed kept his promise and let him go, but he did not know where so many experts had come from to chase after him. No matter where he hid, he would meet people who were searching for him, and all of them were top experts. If he was not heavily injured, these people would not be his opponents, and he would not have to run, he could just kill them. But now he could only flee like a rat crossing the street. For 3 days he was exhausted from running for his life. Fortunately, in the end, he sensed that there was a sealed crystal cave several hundred feet above the ground. He used the earth escape technique to escape to this place. This place was extremely hidden. He hid here for a day, and as expected, no one came to find him. He could finally rest in peace for a day. He clenched his fist again, and his martial arts would completely recover. The moment he recovered, he would definitely take revenge on those who had chased after him. He would make those people beg for death. Hanshanue. Hanshanue. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. Let's wait and see. He stood there in a daze for a moment. Suddenly he seemed to think of something and his expression changed slightly. He vaguely felt that there was something more in his dream than before. He tried his best to think. Suddenly his eyes lit up. He finally remembered a scene from his dream. At that time he seemed to be standing beside someone and then saw that person. Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema appeared in his dream. How did she appear in his dream? Was it a coincidence? Or was there some kind of connection? Several questions rolled around in his mind. He subconsciously walked around the cave. Suddenly he stopped in his tracks. He raised his hand and grabbed at the air, then brought it to his nose and sniffed. Then he slowly loosened his grip. Ning Xuema. He really smelled the scent of Ning Xuema's soul. She had really been here and she was even in her soul form. Little Xuema, did you miss me? Snow was the balcony, jade was the railing, bamboo was the courtyard, and plum blossoms were the gods. Ning Xuema did not expect that she would come to a mountain in a daze. Among the green mountains and trees, there were vague balconies. All the balconies were snow-white, as if they were made of snow. Chapter 637. All the pavilions were snow-white, as if they were made of snow. The courtyards of the pavilions were planted with clumps of bamboo, making rustling sounds with the breeze. The courtyard Ning Xuema appeared and had bamboo and plum blossoms. It was obviously not winter, but the plum blossoms were tender and beautiful, and the branches were covered with dark red dots. Ning Xuema looked at the dark green bamboo on the left, and the plum blossoms on the right. The corners of her mouth faintly twitched. She didn't feel the elegance of the gentleman's words, but instead felt a little demonic. Although plum blossoms and bamboo belonged to the four gentlemen, they shouldn't be in the same season. This was the first time she saw plum blossoms and bamboo complementing each other. Moreover, her sharp eyes saw a few wild chrysanthemums swaying in the corner of the courtyard. This courtyard had 3 of the 4 gentlemen, and only the orchid was left. Speaking of which, whose house had such a tasteful courtyard? How did she come here? Ning Xuema stood in the courtyard and pondered for a moment. She was wondering if she should go in and take a look. The door of the main hall opened and 2 women walked out. The 2 women were dressed similarly. Both of them wore white dresses with cloud patterns on them. Ning Xuema's heart sank slightly. She was not unfamiliar with this pattern. She had seen it twice in the Heavenly Book Mountains, and both times were unpleasant. Bright Reverence Cult. They were the disciples of Bright Reverence Cult. Ning Xuema's gaze fell on the plaque on the main hall's door. The white cloud pattern wrapped around 3 large words, Qinghuan Hall. Ning Xuema's body couldn't help but retreat a zhang. She couldn't have really broken into the lair of Bright Reverence Cult, right? This was the residence of Bright Reverence Cult's leader, Yi Qinghuan? Ning Xuema had heard of this leader for a long time. She was the only female disciple of the ancestor, and was famous for being protective of her disciples. Her disciples could almost do whatever they wanted in this continent. Damn. She was just thinking about it when she was at Shui Yilan's place, and that strange wind really brought her here. She and this Bright Reverence religion were obviously not on good terms. She had been schemed against by the disciples of Bright Reverence religion twice and had almost lost her life. Although she had survived in the end, she had unknowingly formed a grudge with this Bright Reverence religion. She and Yi Qinghuan could be considered enemies. Yi Qinghuan's magic was amazing. She could use magic to disperse people's souls. If she found out that she had broken in by mistake, she would not have a good time. Right now, she was far from being a match for this person. It was better for her to take advantage of the fact that no one noticed and flee far away. Just as she was about to turn around, her body suddenly tightened, as if she was suddenly caught by something. She was shocked. Looking around, she found herself trapped in a pale white net. Master! The 2 women who had just come out knelt in the direction of the palace door. Ning Xuema also raised her head when she heard the voice. Her heart skipped a beat. A woman in a white robe stood at the entrance of the hall. Her long hair was tied up with a white jade hairpin. She had light red lips and a tall nose. Her facial features were beautiful. Coupled with her white robe, she gave off a kind of otherworldly beauty. This made Ning Xuema instantly think of the ancient tomb sex Xiao Longnu. However, looking at her slanted eyebrows and the corners of her eyes, when she looked at people, she gave off a feeling of power without being angry. She looked somewhat cold. This also made Ning Xuema think of Li Macho, who had killed countless people because of love. She didn't know why, but when Ning Xuema looked at her face, she faintly felt that she was familiar. However, she couldn't remember where she had seen her before. Looking at the woman's appearance, she seemed to be a 22 or 23-year-old girl. However, the cold and solemn temperament around her gave people a feeling of vicissitudes. There was no need to ask, she was Yi Qinghuan. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.